Through the thick blizzard of the snowy forest, a wounded player was rushing. He left bloody footprints on the white snow. The light clothing offered little protection against the biting cold, causing him unbearable suffering. Besides, the young man was desperate and couldn't understand why all this was happening to him, why he was still being haunted. But at that very moment, an arrow flew past him at incredible speed. She immediately shot the fugitive in the thigh, causing him to lose balance and fall painfully to the ground. The enemy who approached him from behind just laughed at the guy, because if he was planning to run away, he should have tried harder. The enemy asked to stop resisting and do everyone a favor by simply dying. Then, finally, people appeared through the snow. They had been chasing Mr. Yubek-jun all along. Looking back at his pursuers, the player began to wonder when everything had gone wrong. And he realized that day he definitely shouldn't have made that silly bet, because then he wouldn't be a character in this game. When the game ended, he received an unexpected offer to complete it using the suggested path in exchange for having any wish granted. Obviously, the guy thought this stranger might make him rich, since no one had ever offered him a deal like this before. Moreover, the offer came unexpectedly just when he had finally managed to beat the game as the character Yubek-jun. It was a game where gates connected different worlds and monsters poured out of these portals in hordes. The story takes place in the modern world, where players control hunters battling these creatures. The game's launch caused a real buzz, all thanks to its thrilling adventures set in a well-crafted world. There were hidden elements and 5 different playable characters, and even though it was a single-player game, it became incredibly popular. However, this popularity was short-lived. A year after its release, no users had managed to complete it. 5 game characters died easily, forcing players to start over from the beginning, making the game devilishly difficult. The average completion rate was only 0.1%, which led the project down a path of self-destruction. If we break down the average completion rate of 0.1%, it means no one except the first main character ever managed to finish the game. Basically, only one player has completed the game with a character named Yubek-jun, and that player was our very own player. At that moment, another notification popped up on his desk, inviting him to continue the game in a new mode, where only one player out of 200 was currently active. The online community used to be much bigger, but the game started to slowly fade away, and maybe his friends just decided to move on to a new chat without him. But suddenly, the team leader joined the chat and was surprised to see that one player had been accidentally left in. Then he suggested making a bet in exchange for fulfilling any promise, which intrigued the guy. Would making him handsome and rich really change anything? And what would happen if he failed? As if answering his question, the leader explained that even if they failed, there would be no consequences. And in the end, the young man agreed. For a moment, he realized the chat leader might tell the other friends about the bet they had made. In the end, he did agree, and having become a hardcore gamer, it seemed he even enjoyed all the attention. Even the chat leader praised him for his courage, saying he was the best player of them all. It's no surprise. He's the only one who finished the game playing the toughest character. He knew that no matter how tough it got, he could definitely handle the next challenge. But no sooner had he said it than everything started to blur before his eyes. His head spun as if he had drunk too much alcohol. At that very moment, a message appeared on the screen warning that from now on, everything happening to him would be his new reality, and he alone was responsible for his choice. And that's how he ended up here, in a snowy forest clearing. The first thing the player noticed was the hair hanging down from the head. Obviously, he was surprised. He had never had hair this long before. Then he looked around and saw many armed men surrounding him. The leader calmly approached Mr. Yubek-jun to find out why he had left so abruptly. Clearly, the player was surprised to see the game character looking back at him as if they were a real person. Besides, this man was also Yubek-jun's teacher. With a strange smile, the coach reminded him that his trainee had claimed he would be training all day today. The player was stunned. Looking at this man, he realized every word he said was exactly like in the game. At that moment, the teacher calmly explained that today's training, designed for Yubek-jun, would be much tougher than he had expected. The reason is that his older brother wished the hero dead, and right after those words, an arrow was shot toward Yubek-jun. She cut a lock of his hair and left a bloody wound on his hand. The hero was immediately doubled over in sharp pain, clutching his forearm desperately trying to stop the bleeding. The teacher was amazed by the boy's agility. He aimed straight for his heart but didn't expect him to dodge it. The mentor knew the young man had survived thanks to the holy sword's blood flowing through his veins, despite his weakness, but today would be his end, as he was the disgrace of his clan. Shin Woo-hyun also explained that Yubek-jun's death would benefit everyone, and since he had been working with him all this time, he would grant him a painless death. Only at that moment did the gamer realize that everything happening was real. It wasn't a game or a dream. But right now isn't the best time to think about that. It's clear. Since this wasn't a game but reality, if he fails, he'll die. So the warrior tried to calmly breathe in the cold air and steady himself. He was in more pain than ever before, feeling the blood dripping from his hand. And in that very moment, The young man remembered the last words that had appeared on the screen before he ended up here. Now everything finally comes together. The last message, the long hair, and the silly situation where he's actually being followed. Everything pointed to just one thing. He had truly ended up in the body of Yu Baek-jun, a game character. Of course, the player didn't know how it was possible. But first, he had to survive. And he knew how. Having played this game countless times, the young man tried to remember exactly what he needed to do. He replayed this part of the game many times, and the best way to win was simply to run as fast as you could. However, he was soon caught up with and shot in the thigh. But the player wasn't worried. Even as his enemies closed in from behind, he simply waited for the right moment, which was about to come any second. At that moment, Shin Woo-hyun calmly smiled and comforted the student, assuring him that he wouldn't be alone in the afterlife. Following Yu Baek-jun, his servants, including Choi Seung-min, would also pass on. So the teacher just laughed and decided to see if Yu Baek-jun had any final words. At that moment, Shin Woo-hyun's followers noticed that the fierce blizzard raging around them was suddenly starting to slow down. At that very moment, Yu Baek-jun got back on his feet. Thinking of his final words, he ordered the teacher to die in agony. Obviously, he freaked out, unable to believe that Yu Baek-jun actually said that to him. But at that very moment, a huge wolf lunged at the mentor, aiming straight for his throat. Even though the attack was sudden, Shin Woo-hyun stayed calm and killed the wolf that was targeting him. Of course, he was surprised. The noise they made in the area was enough to attract the attention of the ice wolves. Soon, the teacher heard loud shouts coming from behind him. Looking back, he saw his comrades, whom he had brought, dying one by one at the hands of those creatures. Of course, the man was shocked that trained fighters were so scared and confused by a mere pack of icy wolves. He realized that most of the guys who came with him wouldn't be useful in the future since they couldn't handle such a task. Anyway, he's already pretty tired of these wolves. So the mentor decided to deal with them. However, after that, we also need to deal with the annoying character. To his great shock, when he looked back, he realized the guy had taken advantage of the chaos and slipped away. Around this time, our player was quietly digging through the loose soil, trying to find anything useful hidden beneath the snow. Then he began pressing on his bleeding wound to stop the blood. No matter what herbs he tried, the wound just wouldn't start to heal, and the pain was truly unbearable. But suddenly, a status window popped up, congratulating him on creating a new ointment thanks to his exceptional medical skills. With the help of this unnamed ointment, his wounds began to heal, and he also gained temporary high resistance to the cold. When Yu Baek-jun pulled his hands away from the wound, he saw it glowing brightly and starting to heal, and the bleeding had stopped. He simply sighed with relief, happy that he had mixed everything correctly and managed to heal himself. Basically, it wasn't surprising, since he knew the path Yu Baek-jun took in the game very well. After all, the player spent a full 2 years completing just this one game. But one thing's clear. Since he ended up in his body, he was in deep trouble. The young man recalled all the events from the game about the Holy Sword Clan, which was based on Mount Sarak in Korea. It was founded by a skilled warrior known as the God of War, who helped resolve a gate incident that happened long ago. The God of War disappeared after some time, but despite that, the Holy Sword Clan rapidly grew strong thanks to the divine books left behind and firmly established itself as a respected clan in Korea. One of the 5 children entitled to inherit in this family is Yu Baek-jun. This time, the challenge was much tougher than when he was playing on the other side of the screen. Thanks to the herbal ointment, he managed to stop the bleeding and avoid freezing to death, but its effect will last no more than 30 minutes. He had to think fast, as time was running out and every choice could change his fate. What he just saw, the system window, meant that the hero's journey system was still active, so the warrior decided to bring up the status window once again to take another look. In the end, he looked over all his character's stats. Strength, agility, endurance, and mana were all at just 1 out of 100, and he had no abilities, traits, or skills at all. He used to not pay much attention to the details of his character, but now his life depended on them. In this world, he was truly a genuine ragamuffin. Because Yu Baek-jun's journey begins with a deadly wound, it feels even more grim. If he loses focus for even a moment or makes the slightest mistake, he'll die. There was also a danger from heavy bleeding, and on top of that, he was being chased. Of course, he bought some time thanks to the ice wolves, but the young man knew Shin Woo-hyun wouldn't be broken by that. He had the artifact, so finding a successor for the teacher was only a matter of time. Besides, the hero's skills were the worst in the entire game, and he didn't have a single artifact with him, so he started wondering what he should do next. As he pieced together all his memories of the journey, only one answer came to him. He had to venture into the labyrinth forest where his way out awaited. At that moment, Shin Woo-hyun and his team finally took down the entire pack of attacking ice wolves. At that moment, a small stone on his chest began to glow. And right away, the assistant pointed out the tracking artifact to the master. Shin Woo-hyun, staring at the artifact, vowed to do whatever it takes to catch and kill that bastard this time. At that moment, the artifact pointed him toward the labyrinth forest. So he told the guys to get ready, because this mission might even require them to risk their lives. At the very least, this was necessary because the eldest heir had to acknowledge him, allowing him to take the desired position. At that moment, the player kept running, remembering that in this world, the main enemy of humanity was the monsters, hunted down and destroyed by hunters. The difficulty varies greatly depending on the shape of the gates and the monsters. There are different categories: easy, moderate, and difficult. But even hunters find one area so tough they turn back. And this area was located right here and was called Mount Sarak. It seems like there's no place on Earth more hellish than this, since the monsters have built their own ecosystem and live in it like wild animals. This rugged mountain terrain has become a place hunters tend to avoid. Of course, the weak Yu Baek-jun shouldn't have come here without any protection. He reached the mountain only thanks to the efforts of his teacher, Shin Woo-hyun. This man had been training the boy since he was a child. In reality, he was the one supporting his older brothers while their father was away. He was ordered to kill Yu Baek-jun, so he led him high up Mount Sarak. In other words, the player needs to survive these snowy slopes and make it back home. This is the usual way to handle Yu Baek-jun's path at the start. But the player took a different road and finally found what they were looking for. This was why he wandered here all the time. A secret mountain spot, unknown to anyone, where the clan's home awaited. The sign warned, those who lack the courage to risk their lives and the icy calm to face danger must leave this place. After the player reached this sign, Shin Woo-hyun arrived there too, along with his subordinates. Obviously, the assistants were worried they would really have to enter the maze forest, where many had gone in and never come out. They feared the same fate might befall them. Shin Woo-hyun understood why his subordinates disliked the idea, but he needed proof of Yu Baek-jun's death. Besides, the elder heir's artifact could help them, ensuring they won't get lost. Despite his confident words, something was still bothering the man. Since when did Yu Baek-jun get so bold as to come in here? It felt like he had become a completely different person. At that moment, Shin Woo-hyun finally spotted footprints in the snow. Since the snow hadn't covered the tracks yet, it was clear that Yu Baek-jun had passed through recently and couldn't have gone far because of his injury, so they had to give chase. But first, Shin Woo-hyun signaled his team to gather and discuss the plan. Soon, everyone was running after him, trying to find new signs of the attack. One of the team members noticed they were going in circles and began to doubt if they had chosen the right path. But the teacher calmly reminded her where they were and asked her to stop acting foolish. It was only then that she noticed a human head lying in the snow. Seeing her fear, the man reminded her they were in a maze-like forest, where it was impossible to tell if they were on the right path or just going in circles. Even the man whose face they had just seen had wandered these halls hundreds of thousands of times before his death. That was the nature of this labyrinth, and if the subordinates wanted to spend eternity here, they couldn't afford to let their guard down. At that moment, the player kept moving forward, feeling like he was about to die. Besides, the guy began to truly understand just how amazing medicinal herbs really were. But more importantly, he was haunted by a strange, instinctive feeling that he could die here. And obviously, he was also upset with that chat leader. He should have warned him in advance about the risks involved in making the deal. In the end, he was tricked when he took the bait. But above all, it was his own choice. Besides, it didn't matter now, because the warrior was literally at the very edge of his strength. He immediately started looking around for the exact spot he was searching for. With a relieved sigh, the young man realized he hadn't gotten lost in the maze after all. He had finally reached the very end. When he first arrived here in the game, all he felt was despair. Every time I thought I found a way out, there were only rocks blocking the path. He thought he had just wasted time. But the experience he gained from the game is really helping him now. Now all he needed to do was stay focused. And just then, it was the perfect moment for some uninvited guests to arrive. And indeed, when he turned around, the player saw the team of pursuers closing in on him. Shin Woo-hyun seemed really surprised that Yu Baek-jun managed to make it all the way here. The player was stunned that the teacher had even stopped addressing him as "my lord," despite maintaining formalities all along. The mentor warned that despite all the running, the warrior ended up at the cliff, clearly showing that his pointless struggle would end right there and then. Of course, Yu Baek-jun knew why the man was treating him that way. He suspected the man wanted to become Yu Tae-ran's lapdog, and he was right. The man truly decided to support the elderly gentleman. His power was truly great and matched that of the Holy Sword clan. At first, Yu Baek-jun had a feeling, but now he's completely sure everything happened exactly like in the game. If that's the case, it was too risky to waste any more time. If he waits any longer, he'll just freeze to death. But at that moment, his body went weak. His legs gave out, and the player dropped to his knees. Only then did he realize the problem wasn't frostbite at all. The snow beneath him was soaked with blood. At this rate, he could die from blood loss. Even the teacher laughed, realizing their whole conversation had taken so long that Yu Baek-jun would die before delivering the final blow. But instead of letting him die slowly and painfully, the mentor promised to end his life instantly. his final act of mercy. Of course, Yu Baek-jun was grateful for the kindness, but he wanted to say something to his teacher one last time. Smiling calmly, the warrior pointed out a unique feature of the artifact that had been hanging around Shin Woo-hyun's neck all along. The thing was, he was disposable, so the man had no chance of escaping the maze. Without waiting for an answer, he immediately jumped off the cliff, plunging straight down to the very bottom. And the angry teacher hurled a blade after him, aiming to cut him into tiny pieces. All he managed was to wound the hero one last time before he fell into the deepest abyss. Now everyone was sure Yu Baek-jun was definitely dead, and besides, there was no way they could retrieve his body. So the teacher suggested heading back home. The elder gentleman would believe the task was done. But the moment he touched the amulet, he realized to his great shock that it had stopped glowing and wouldn't activate. Only then did Shin Woo-hyun finally realize that maybe Yu Baek-jun had been telling him the truth all along. At that moment, the monsters began emerging from the depths of the forest, drawn by the scent of human blood. Only at that moment did the traitors realize the fate that awaited them. Meanwhile, the player, falling into an abyss, suddenly slipped into a portal. He traveled through the portal once more until he found himself at the very bottom of the cave. The warrior immediately started coughing up blood from his severe wounds. And then the golden glowing book appeared right before his eyes. Obviously, the guy immediately reached out to her, hoping she would help him heal his body as quickly as possible. But before he could open it, he lost consciousness on the cold cave floor. The system automatically verified his qualifications and confirmed his bloodline connection to the god of war. She also labeled the hero as someone with zero talent. Then his body soared into the air, and the system began forcibly awakening the dormant blood of the god of war. Right after that, Yu Baek-jun's eyes glowed with a bright golden light. The color began to glow from its entire body, soon lighting up the whole cave. The author of that book knew it would one day be opened by a distant descendant whose name he didn't even know. He also explained that during his life, he aimed to capture all the combat techniques in the world. In my later years, I decided to leave this book as a legacy for future generations. The god of war hoped that even after his death, she would continue to document the new martial arts emerging in the world. And of course, he hoped his descendant would be able to use it for their own benefit. Finally awake, the player read these words and promised the ancestor to use them for honest deeds. With the help of the book, he gained the unique power of the Book of the God of War and mastered the heavenly battle physique, allowing him to keep improving himself. And it really worked. While Yu Baek-jun was unconscious, his body fully healed, and it seems his rank has also gone up. But more importantly, he gained a powerful, unique ability and a special trait. As you know, a hero's journey doesn't have levels. Instead, progress is earned through ranks, traits, and professional qualifications, which wasn't an easy task. Yu Baek-jun's path is one of the toughest in the game, known for its extreme difficulty. The only thing that makes it doable is gaining unique abilities and traits. This was one of the reasons the player went so far, risking his life. The first trait he needed to master was the Celestial Battle Physique, which boosts the growth of his stats and skill learning speed, while also occasionally unlocking new abilities and further strengthening his power. This is literally an unbeatable trait, and it plays a major role in his growth. And of course, the unique power of the Book of the God of War. As you know, a unique ability is a special power that only one person can have. It can't be learned, shared, or copied by anyone else. The hero gained an incredibly powerful and unique ability. Besides, the book made it easy to learn the techniques almost automatically. It wasn't limited to martial arts. Any combat-applicable technique, even if it's fantasy-based, could be learned. The only regret was that you couldn't learn magic or alchemy. But for that, the hero had other methods he learned from the game. First thing, since he got some points, the warrior decided to check them out. He had a whole 100 of them, and decided to find out what he could do with them. By trading these glasses, he gained several techniques. The triple strike, Bashi charge, and mastery of the Rafald Principality's spear. He didn't need any sword techniques. In his current state, fighting was basically suicide. However, he was drawn to the movement technique. This martial art lightens the body and also boosts speed, agility, and reflexes. This was a key skill that would be useful both for escaping and for fighting. Moreover, since the Book of the God of War improved Yu Baek-jun's skills, he was also able to do some other interesting things. All he has left to do now is choose a mission. Among the tasks offered, he was drawn to one called Catch Me If You Can, but he knew he might be passed over for now. So I checked out another task called Forgive Me, My Ancestor. Please help me become a righteous bandit just for today. The title was pretty lame, but he had no other choice. As soon as he chose it, the walls in the cave began to rise, forming a passage. From his past experience playing this game, the warrior already knew that this quest would lead him down a challenging, maze-like path. If he finds a way out, rewards will surely be waiting at his destination. Basically, it was a reward for the Tomb of the God of War. And for Yu Baek-jun, it was an incredibly easy mission. The guy also started wondering about his teacher Shin Woo-hyun. How's he doing these days? Knowing the game's plot well, he understood that the man would have been better off running away. At this moment, the monsters drawn by the scent of blood have already wiped out every helper they encountered. The only one still alive is Shin Woo-hyun, who was hiding on a tree branch. He saw the monsters tracking him by his scent and didn't know what to do. At that moment, a huge snake-like monster lunged at him. However, Yoo Baek-jun believed that his mentor had surely managed to find his way out of the maze-like forest. He knew very well that getting him out wouldn't be easy, but the teacher was up to the task. While thinking it over, the player gathered the 3 needed flowers. It was the root of the sun, the root of the fiery spirit, even a fiery ginseng. All he has left to do now is open the chest to complete the mission. When he opened it, he found treasures inside. A 1,000-year-old snow ginseng in the treasure keeper's pouch. He also completed the task and earned 500 points. And the Black Demon reward immediately landed right next to the hero. He was also warned that he needed to leave, as the tomb would be destroyed after his mission was complete. And as the stones slowly started falling from the ground up, for some reason the hero felt there was a strange kind of romance in it. The tomb was ready to collapse the moment she passed through. It felt like some kind of cliché. He also thought it was too cliché that secret inheritances are always hidden in ridiculous places like a maze forest. Fortunately, it was fair. The harder the challenges on the way to the reward, the more valuable that reward becomes. In the end, he obtained the Black Dragon armor at a high cost. This armor is actually a powerful cloak crafted by a great master from rare materials. She boosted defensive strength, repaired damaged parts, and improved the carrier's survivability. Around this time, a light was shining at the main gates of the Holy Sword Clan. A guy was sitting and playing a game on his phone. He was furious because, once again, he couldn't get past her and ended up losing. He only looked up from his smartphone when he saw a silhouette through the glass. At first, the guard thought it was a monster, but soon recognized the silhouette as Mr. Yoo Baek-jun. The player immediately ordered that Choi Seung-min be brought to him at once. But when the guy didn't catch what he said the first time, the warrior practically shouted at him, quite harshly, which really took the guard by surprise. After that, the player lost consciousness right by the closed door. Soon, the servants who arrived immediately carried him to the infirmary. Choi Seung-min was very worried about the gentleman's condition, as he had been sleeping without waking for 5 days straight. Of course, the doctor was worried too, but he asked Choi Seung-min to be patient and wait a little longer. Besides, the healer saw that the reason he slept so long wasn't just one wound. Choi Seung-min also started wondering what else could be the reason the gentleman wouldn't wake up. Looking at the sleeping hero, it was hard to tell what had happened to him. He showed no visible injuries, and actually looked healthier than before, so at first glance, he seemed fine. They even suggested that he might be having a nightmare, and right after those words, Yoo Baek-jun finally came to his senses. Clearly, both the doctor and Choi Seung-min were very happy to see their master finally awake. The guy couldn't believe he had actually dreamed within another dream. Then he started looking around, scanning the area with his eyes. When he opened the window, he heard a loud scream coming from below. The shout came from the fighters training on the practice field. Some, having finished their training, headed toward the rank gates in the western area. They decided to prepare as best they could for their next mission, knowing that if the rumors were true, someone might come to them from the mountains. Clearly frightened, the player wanted to know where he was, since he didn't recognize the place. Choi Seung-min calmly explained that the heir was part of the Holy Sword Clan, and it just so happened that this was also his home. Only then did Yoo Baek-jun bitterly realize that everything he had seen was not a dream after all. The healer just smiled, thinking his patient was confused, then decided to ask the boy if he was feeling any pain. A slightly eccentric warrior explained that he had a mild headache. Right after saying this, the healer went to get medicine for the gentleman, while Choi Seung-min went to fetch food. However, Yoo Baek-jun asked Choi Seung-min to stop and wanted to ask him what day it was, since he had overslept for 4 days. Today was the 15th day of the year 2035. After answering all of the worried owner's questions, the servant immediately went to bring him some food. As Yoo Baek-jun looked at the system, he realized that everything that had happened to him was definitely not a dream. This meant he had just safely returned home as a game character. Soon, alone, he began to wonder what he should do next. The player returned home just as planned. However, it couldn't be said that this place was any safer than the snowy plains where he was stuck. It was an extension of the Holy Sword Clan's estate, where many fought fiercely for dominance. The children of powerful clans fight for control within their own clan. This is the eternal epicenter of conflict. Also here were Yoo Tai-ran, the eldest brother, Yoo Jong-un, the eldest daughter, Yoo Kang-ho, the third son, and Yoo Min, the fourth daughter. And after all of them came Yoo Baek-jun, the youngest child. There used to be 3 more children, but they were killed by Yoo Tai-ran's orders. You could call it a typical power struggle between siblings. It's logical to assume that if the eldest brother becomes the heir, he will most likely become the next patriarch, and all the other heirs are well aware of this. For this reason, the clever third brother joined forces with the eldest. while the eldest sister nearly gave up and showed no interest in fighting for the throne. But the fourth sister remained a mystery. The question remained, why did the older brother decide to kill his 3 younger siblings? Maybe it was because he was so worried and didn't want to risk even the slightest danger, so he decided to eliminate all his potential enemies. So having taken control of the chaos, he left no one a single chance. And even forming a coalition with other heirs against him was out of the question. So, to sum up, he could be called the main villain standing in Yu Baek-jun's way as the hero. Besides, today was January 15th, 2035. It was expected that in 2 years, Yu Baek-jun's father would pass the clan patriarch title to his eldest brother. If Yu Baek-jun doesn't take action regarding his older brother by then, the brother will do everything to kill him. So the hero was exactly 2 years old and there was no way to wait any longer. Once Yu Tae-ran takes control as the clan leader, his power will be firmly established. Right now, Yu Tae-ran has set off to deal with the gates on Mount Sarak and will arrive exactly 2 months from now. Yu Baek-jun had to become as strong as possible before his return, because in this family, power belongs to the strongest. In other words, if the player grows stronger, the clan will recognize him too. Fortunately, the Holy Sword clan has many great teachers, so the player went to the healer's room to find one of them. At that moment, the man was grinding the hero's headache medicine right there. The warrior immediately apologized for entering without permission. He had gone upstairs to find him because he couldn't locate him downstairs. Then he smiled and asked me to watch what he was doing. To gain strength for the future, he needed to become a doctor's apprentice. The man was very surprised by the young gentleman's unexpected request, and so Yu Baek-jun quickly explained that he was just curious about his current condition. However, it was clear that he was met with a very confused look from Dr. Chu Jun-won. This man is a doctor who worked for the clan during the previous leader's rule. He's not only passionate about his work, but also exceptionally talented. He's not involved in the clan's power struggles. His only focus is gathering herbs and making medicine, and he still hasn't taken on any apprentices. He could have found a student if he wanted to, but there was a reason he didn't. When he was younger, he admitted that although he was learning the art of medicine, he didn't want to pass it on to the clan. The problem was that no one in the clan wanted to learn healing, as they saw no point in studying medicine when they could just buy medicine or hire a healer. In the end, Chu Jun-won never found a student, but the player knew this man would be very useful to him. He held an elixir that could make him many times stronger. However, to obtain it, he needed to have the skill of a pharmacist in making medicines. At that moment, Chu Jun-won explained that developing a new drug usually takes much less time, and apologized for letting the hero down. Getting older made it harder for him to be so quick and agile. Then he decided to ask the guy what exactly he was interested in, thinking he might be able to help and share a lot about herbalism. Despite his age, he had worked with many herbs throughout his life, and it turned out this was exactly the topic that interested Yu Baek-jun. Obviously, Chu Jun-won couldn't help but be surprised by his genuine interest. Then Yu Baek-jun explained that he taught himself herbal medicine using books and study materials. He immediately recognized the medicine as a blend of copper herb and sleepy flower. Judging by the smell, the medicine made by the man helped ease headaches and restore inner calm. Of course, the man was surprised that the heir could not only identify the ingredients by smell. The player knew he had caught the old man's attention, because to become his apprentice, he had to prove his knowledge of medicine. So he kept going, making it clear that books alone couldn't give him all the knowledge. So he gathered and used herbs himself, memorizing their scent by trying them several times in a row. But he sensed another strange scent, perhaps a hint of slightly poisonous herbs. And the young man was right. The herbalist added them for a reason. Although they're poisonous, when burned and the poison removed, they become herbs that help restore mana energy. Then the man realized that the young gentleman's talent wasn't in martial arts at all. It was an extraordinary gift for saving lives. If only he weren't the heir to the Holy Sword clan, Chu Jun-won might have taken him as an apprentice. At that moment, Yu Baek-jun decided to ask the healer if he knew how he had ended up in this condition. According to Choi Seung-min's story, Yu Baek-jun went for a walk and was attacked by monsters, which made him realize that the healer was unaware of Shin Woo-hyun's attempt on his life. So Yu Baek-jun calmly explained that the incident made him realize the importance of medicine more than ever before, as they are incredibly helpful in dangerous situations. But it was a shame he hadn't had the chance to study them properly before, and now he wanted to work even harder. And then Chu Jun-won offered the boy to become his very own apprentice. Of course, Yu Baek-jun was surprised that the pharmacist made his offer so quickly, and he was even more amazed that the man agreed despite being so busy. However, the old man honestly admitted that if he were to teach the young master, he would be willing to put aside all other matters. Of course, he couldn't teach the boy everything from scratch, so he wanted to find out how much he already knew. For Yu Baek-jun, receiving recognition from pharmacist Chu Jun-won was a great honor. By this time, the healer had finished preparing the conscious medicine and offered it to the hero to ease his headache. So while they were talking, Yu Baek-jun received a notification from the system. He had become a pharmacist apprentice, and if he keeps it up, he'll gain the expert knowledge of a top pharmacist. Now the hero just had to complete Chu Jun-won's tasks, and if he appeared before him a few more times, he could learn the skill of making Eastern medicines. Playing the game, he had done it hundreds of times, so it shouldn't be hard. Besides, the warrior knew he could trust this man, who lacked the thirst for power that Master Shin Woo-hyun had. And the same went for the servant Choi Sung-min. Choi Sung-min once healed his family by asking for help from Yoo Baek-jun, so he felt he owed the gentleman a debt he hadn't yet repaid. However, lacking any talent for martial arts, he had spent recent years serving as a servant, and the player was certain these people would never betray him, and for now that was enough. He decided to find out what to do next when suddenly the system window lit up. The system noticed that the player was too thin, so as a reward for earning 50 points, it challenged Yoo Baek-jun to run non-stop for at least 5 hours. Clearly, Choi Sung-min was utterly shocked when his master showed up, saying he wanted to train. He just couldn't believe it. However, the player asked Choi Sung-min not to worry. He could stay in the house while he finished his training. Obviously, the boy couldn't understand what had suddenly pushed the guy to start training so intensely. But suddenly, he remembered the clan leader's words. He couldn't believe that Yoo Baek-jun was his son, and even ordered the guy to get out of his sight. In the clan of the Holy Sword, it was a kingdom of beasts where only the strongest survived. No one was really exempt from this rule, not even if you were a close family member. However, Yoo Baek-jun was always a very kind child. He wasn't a martial arts prodigy and had a gentle nature, which made others look down on him from an early age. Even common folk mocked him when he showed up for training, thinking this place wasn't meant for him. The reaction of these people perfectly reflected Yoo Baek-jun's current standing in society. No one took him seriously. Even beginner students understood why the clan patriarch disowned the hero. If he had been born into a different family, he might have enjoyed his books. But now there was nothing he could do. This was the way of the Holy Sword clan. But as Yoo Baek-jun warmed up, he realized everything was about to change, and his life would never be the same. Now he knew the running technique. Though unsure if he could move properly, he dashed forward using a movement technique, a martial art that lightens the body and boosts speed, reflexes, and strength. Now, after trying out this skill, he finally understood the feeling he had when he returned to the clan from the God of War's tomb. This skill made his body completely weightless. It was incredibly convenient to use whenever he wanted. Besides, his life felt much more real now than it ever did before, even in moments of mortal danger. But by the end of the workout, he felt completely drained of energy. It seemed like he was about to die, trapped in the body of a real living dead man. He still managed to complete his mission and was rewarded with 50 points and an increase in his strength. Only after falling to his knees and catching his breath did the young man realize how difficult his task truly was. And yet, the training results were better than he expected, boosting all his stats except agility and mana. A pretty good outcome. But his joy was quickly cut short by a familiar voice behind him. Some guy was mocking the hero, not realizing the boy smelled like a rotten corpse. He was the third eldest brother in the Saint Sword clan, Yoo Kan-ho. Of course, Yoo Baek-jun had no idea at all why this guy was here. Yoo Kan-ho, barely hiding his grimace, explained that Yoo Baek-jun's sweat smell was ruining the clan's fresh air and asked what he was doing here. Yoo Baek-jun smiled warmly, remembering that his third brother also appeared in the game, so he calmly explained that he came just to practice a little. And his brother just laughed, realizing they could never have met if Yoo Baek-jun had been locked in his room all day as usual, and he wondered why the guy needed to train in the first place. The player barely hid his disgust at the questions. The guy in front of him was a few years older, but acted like a total jerk. Yoo Kan-ho kept insisting, calling the hero a hopeless fool who wouldn't improve no matter what. And Yoo Baek-jun endured it because, after all, his brother was the third heir of the Holy Sword clan. He was also known as the biggest jerk in the clan, blowing money left and right and reckless with women. Basically a guy who stirred up trouble every time he stepped outside. But the player decided to explain to his brother that a monster had recently attacked him, which is why he started training, realizing that books might not be enough and something worse could happen next time. But Yoo Kan-ho still thought it was a complete waste of time. Still, he politely offered his brother help, just in case he ever needed it. Then he punched him right in the face, pretending it was just a training tip. Before leaving, he gave a sly smile and shot him a burning look, then finally walked away. Meanwhile, the player sat on the ground with trembling hands, wiping the blood dripping from his nose and glaring at his brother with hatred. He swore he would kill him as soon as the chance came, but the time for that had not yet come. The system surrounding him clearly showed that he still needed to become stronger. His next task was a 3-hour strength training session, which he headed to right away. And just like that, soon after another workout, he was already sitting at home, tallying up his points. He was offered to buy the triple fist and triple mind techniques, each costing 100 points. Since Yoo Baek-jun earned 500 points from the Tomb of the God of War and 100 more from completing tasks to get rid of the bony body, he could afford to buy them. However, all this time he was saving points to learn a skill from one of the top A-class hunters called Attribute Demonstration, which despite being an A-rank skill, cost only 500 points. But because it consumes an insane amount of mana, it was quite difficult to perform, and it also combined with the Millennial Ginseng. Compared to the Attribute Demonstration skill, all the other skills offered by the system were truly useless. Although the suggested strike technique wasn't that bad. Even if Yu Baek-jun trained to exhaustion, it was still just a third-rate martial art. Although he had a reason to study it, it was an important event coming up that he knew well. So, while Yu Baek-jun was working hard to get rid of his skinny frame, he was also training alongside Chu Jun-won. He constantly showed his knowledge of medicines. For example, he identified a poisonous herb that contained a toxin so strong it could cause suffocation if eaten. However, this grass could also be washed and dried, which would then provide energy. And clearly, after such detailed explanations, Chu Jun-won was practically glowing, holding back tears of joy. After completing the medical test and spending 4 days shedding his skinny frame, the player earned a few points. And finally, the system congratulated him, saying he could now develop Eastern medicines, which would be 1.5 times more effective than regular ones. Even Chu Jun-won admitted that Yu Baek-jun was talented, and most of his knowledge could already be considered worthy of a great herbalist. The player finally realized that the old man couldn't see his system window. He had his doubts before, but now he was sure that only he could see it. Right now, something else was more important. He thanked Chu Jun-won for the invaluable lessons he had taught him. He also explained that he wanted to prepare certain medicines and asked his teacher for help. And though he laughed, he still decided to ask the student what he wanted to create. But his expression darkened when he saw the ingredients laid out on the table. It was hard to believe that the heir had obtained the 1,000-year-old snow ginseng. He also had a fiery spirit solar root and even some fiery ginseng. Finally, the man understood why monsters had attacked Yu Baek-jun, and the player just awkwardly apologized for not sharing everything from the very start. However, Chu Jun-won fully understood. He would have done the same if he were the boy. After all, a 1,000-year-old snow ginseng is an incredibly valuable ingredient. The man had never seen such a rare root before, but the energy it gave off clearly came from a very rare plant. He wanted to know what kind of medicine the player intended to make from him. He admitted that he wanted to create a pill that would boost yang energy to such a peak that it could overpower the yin energy of a 1,000-year-old ginseng. Only then did the man realize his student was about to consume the 1,000-year-old snow ginseng. Finally, Chu Jun-won realized that all this time, the boy had been training hard to absorb this plant. Fueled by even greater enthusiasm, he suggested trying to make something out of it. So the player used his new skill in crafting Eastern potions. And since he was aided by someone with exceptional talents, the effects were even stronger. Soon, the most powerful Class A pill, crafted by an incredible pharmacist and packed with immense energy, was ready. Soon, the player found themselves looking at 2 very different ingredients, a snowy ginseng and a pill, each radiating completely opposite energies. Only now did the young man truly realize how precious the gift he received as a reward from the tomb of the god of war was. Chu Jun-won decided to watch the boy from a distance. If the situation with the absorption seemed too dangerous, he would call for help. After settling everything, the player immediately turned his gaze to the glowing pill. And without wasting any more time, he immediately swallowed her whole. Energy began to flow through his body. Even Chu Jun-won tensed up. The boy's aura flared, his hair shot up toward the sky, and his eyes were covered with a white haze. All this time, the guy felt an intense heat all over his body. It was unbearably hot. But he had to hold on, because Yan's energy still hadn't spread throughout his body. Once the energy starts flowing through every cell, he can move on to the next step. And finally, he felt his entire body engulfed evenly in flames. So he immediately grabbed the icy ginseng and started devouring it. Right after that, Yin's energy began freezing every meridian in his body. He tried to calm down in order to channel his energy the right way. The teacher was panicking because what he was witnessing looked like some kind of sinister exorcism ritual. Of course, he knew he had to call for help right away, worried that the young master wouldn't manage on his own. However, I soon noticed the guy take a stance for a cultivation technique, but it was nothing like the one used in the Holy Sword clan. It turned out that Yu Baek-jun used the triple mind technique, a crude and pitiful method, but one that could help in learning how to control mana. And soon, the old man witnessed something almost impossible. Even with this technique, Yu Baek-jun's mana finally began to flow. It was nothing short of a miracle that he was able to take the 1,000-year-old snow ginseng. Besides that, he also managed to master the cultivation technique. Finally, when the time came, the player finished cultivating and opened his eyes. By the time he reached his home, it was already deep into the night. He recalled his conversation with Chu Jun-won, who was very curious about how he trained his cultivation technique. However, the player was just joking cleverly, explaining that he was imitating someone else's performance. Of course, Chu Jun-won believed him, thinking the man was very talented, while the guy was just happy he managed to keep it a secret. He knew his success came from Chu Jun-won thinking too highly of him. Finally, he reached the training ground, which was completely deserted. This was the perfect place to check his status window. His mana rank had risen to B, and he even had a buff from elixirs. So now he was ready to use his new skill, Attribute Demonstration. It was a skill created by a master swordsman to channel his excess mana into his sword. It can appear as an aura through the merging of power and mana. One of the characters the heroes meet along their journey has a unique ability called Dragon's Heart, which gives her a special heart that lets her generate an incredible amount of mana. Thinking of her, the player tried to use his skill, and suddenly the ground began to crack beneath his feet. As expected, since it was an A-rank skill, it turned out to be quite powerful. However, it demanded an unbearable amount of mana, causing the player to quickly run out of energy. It was to be expected. After all, displaying attributes is a skill the girl created to control her excess mana. He managed to avoid terrible consequences only thanks to the 1,000-year-old snow ginseng. In normal situations, he wouldn't even consider using a skill like that. The warrior began to think about the girl, guessing she was somewhere in the US, and he was eager to meet her someday. But for now, it was time to prepare for the most important event. So, after coming home, he took a nap for a couple of hours until the sun rose. A sleepy servant brought him breakfast, complaining that his master had been waking up so early lately, which was keeping Choi Seung-min from getting a good night's sleep. Ignoring his words, the player decided to find out what the clan was up to that morning. It turned out that since today was Sunday, the clan members would be watching the training sessions. They also asked if the young gentleman wanted to join them, but Choi Seung-min declined, since the player had only watched these training sessions as a child. But to the servant's great shock, Yoo Baek-jun agreed to go this time. He realized that taking part in such events was his duty as a clan member. Of course, Choi Seung-min understood this, but Yoo Baek-jun had only watched the training once, as a child, and immediately said he never wanted to go through it again, which infuriated the clan leader. However, Yoo Baek-jun didn't want to think about those events, especially since he only had an hour left to get ready. So he went to get ready and asked Choi Seung-min to let everyone know that he would be coming this time as well. Soon after, they set off for the place where the heirs were supposed to meet. Many trainees were surprised to see him, as he hadn't come to watch the morning workouts in a long time. In fact, watching the training sessions was an ancient tradition of the Holy Sword Clan. Every morning, new clan members trained together in groups. Combat instructors and members of the Holy Sword Clan family watched these training sessions closely. Although Yoo Baek-jun thought it was a pointless tradition, the clan leader was also among the people watching the training. His name was Yoo Moo-hak. Just one look at the man made the guy feel an overwhelming pressure. The instructors closely watched the leader from all sides. But suddenly, the youngest brother was called by someone. With a smile, the girl decided to ask how her brother was feeling after the monsters attacked him. She was Yoo Jong-en, the eldest daughter of the head of the Holy Sword Clan. Yoo Baek-jun smiled warmly, thanked his sister for her concern, and explained that he had recovered thanks to Dr. Chu Jun-won's help. But at that moment, Yoo Kan-ho shook his head in frustration, surprised by his unlucky brother. He couldn't understand how a member of the Holy Sword Clan could be on the brink of death after being attacked by some pathetic monsters. Clearly, he believed Yoo Baek-jun was bringing shame to their family. The player could barely hold back from telling that bastard off right then and there. And sitting right next to the third brother was Ymir, the fourth daughter of the Holy Sword Clan. The third brother wouldn't calm down. Hearing that Yoo Baek-jun often visited the infirmary and seemed interested in medicine, he thought it was the perfect fit for a guy who had no talent for swordsmanship and only cared about books. Yoo Baek-jun was literally shaking with anger. He had tried to be patient with the guy, but now realized he'd have to get straight to the point earlier than planned. At that very moment, without hesitation, the third brother called Yoo Baek-jun a miserable loser and ordered him to follow after training so the elder brother could teach him the proper art of the sword. At that moment, Yoo Baek-jun earnestly asked his older brother to at least keep quiet for a little while. Everyone froze, unable to believe that Yoo Baek-jun actually dared to say something like that. The third brother was completely stunned. He couldn't believe the youngest actually dared to talk back. Yoo Baek-jun calmly explained that his bad breath was noticeable even from a distance and suggested he brush his teeth more often, especially given how frequently he had cigarettes, alcohol, and coffee in his mouth. The third brother didn't even know how to respond. He just stood there frozen. Yoo Baek-jun, deciding to smile, explained that it was just friendly advice about dental care, and he probably had the time since he was always chasing after girls. When he finished his rant, his older sister laughed with satisfaction, hardly believing that Yoo Baek-jun had actually put their proud one in his place. The third brother, embarrassed, shouted out, promising he would definitely kill the hero who clearly was tired of living. At that moment, Yoo Baek-jun was already down on one knee, bowing before his father to make his request. He admitted that he wanted to learn martial arts, and that was exactly when his first major mission was supposed to begin. At that moment, the other guys started their training, honing their sword techniques that cut through the sky. However, all the attention from both the instructors and the family members was focused on the hero. Of course, the head of the family explained that this wasn't the right place for someone without martial arts skills. However, the player recently showed a genuine interest in martial arts. The head of the family found it hard to believe, especially since his son had previously insisted he didn't want to learn techniques for killing people. And the guy couldn't deny he'd said something like that. But when faced with death, he changed his mind. Instead of dying without a chance to act, he chose to study martial arts to fight for his dreams, and now he had let go of his reckless thoughts. Obviously, the father wanted to know what the boy was planning to do next. It turned out he wanted to learn martial arts from one of the 4 instructors. Obviously, the instructors immediately gave the hero a sharp, attentive look. The third brother jumped up, believing that someone like the player had no right to learn from the instructors, a demand so ridiculous it would make even a stray dog laugh. Even his father believed that, given his son's talent for martial arts, teaching someone with such a useless skill would be a complete waste of time, especially if his teacher were a talented combat instructor. However, Yu Baek-jun was ready to prove that he did have talent after all. He expected that such a remark would catch the head of the family's attention, so he made that promise, and everyone became curious about how he planned to prove it. And this was exactly the main event the player had been preparing for. He promised that exactly 1 week later, he would beat his older brother in a fair sparring match. Obviously, the third brother nearly lost his temper. He believed that Yu Baek-jun was mocking him in this way. He never thought he'd hear such nonsense from a kid who'd never even come close to martial arts. However, Yu Baek-jun's brother didn't really care. All that mattered to him was their father's decision. It was truly interesting to watch the younger son's attempt. However, he warned that this would be his last chance. If he fails, he won't be able to call himself part of their clan anymore. Obviously, by making such a claim, he had to be ready to risk such a high price. And the most surprising thing is that Yu Baek-jun was completely satisfied with that price. Soon he arrived in the training ground, fully aware that he had only 1 week. If he can defeat Yu Kong-ho, he will begin training in martial arts with one of the 4 instructors. You could say the reward for this event was learning a new skill. He created a scarecrow from mana that absorbed a certain amount of the user's mana, allowing it to move and attack, though in a limited way. And the player was ready to push his skills to the limit by using that very scarecrow. The other students couldn't believe that Yu Baek-jun was actually going to train. They also laughed because they heard that Yu Baek-jun ran away in tears when Mr. Yu Kong-ho tried to train him. So they wanted to watch him fail and thought he wouldn't last long against a simple scarecrow. At that moment, the player began practicing the triple fist technique, a fighting style known only to street gangsters. You just needed to master 3 basics: elbow strikes and uppercuts. And of course, he also used qigong techniques to strengthen his punches and weapon strikes. In the end, to everyone's surprise, he completely smashed the scarecrow with just a couple of hits. One of the instructors was closely watching this training session. By this point, 3 days had passed since the hero began training. The woman saw that there was nothing special about what the heir was doing right now. The guy was just running while practicing qigong techniques and working on his triple punch skills. But something else caught her attention. She wanted to know what he did to have the energy to practice qigong all day, as no matter how much he trained, his posture never faltered and his endurance was remarkable. She also wanted to know why he used the fist technique. As she was thinking about it, she suddenly bumped into another instructor. He decided to ask this girl if she had changed her mind, but she still hadn't. The instructor kept trying to explain to her that it would be more beneficial to support young Mr. Yu Tae-ran. However, the lady refused to join him and only asked the senior teacher to take care of himself. And so another day passed as the hero pondered his training. Late at night, he sat on the training grounds surrounded by many broken dolls. Looking back at what he had accomplished, the young man felt genuinely proud of himself. At first he was worried about possible changes from the game, but so far he hasn't noticed any. And the 1,000-year-old snow ginseng helped him just like in the game. Without its power, he probably would have lost consciousness long ago. But at that moment, an unknown man called out to him. When he turned around, he saw one of the instructors who had come to help him regain his composure. Looking at the woman, he remembered the class system of the Holy Sword Clan, where after the leader came the senior teachers, then the regular teachers, and finally the students. Senior teachers and instructors support the heirs they favor. It's only natural that the more support an heir received, the greater their advantage in the competition. However, some teachers remained neutral, like Miss Hansona. Of course, the player was thrilled to have finally caught her attention. Handing over a towel to dry off, the lady mentioned that the eldest teacher has been training the third brother for quite some time now. However, Yu Baek-jun clearly saw no point in saying something like that to him. She seemed to be saying that he would lose to him no matter what. Of course, the woman tried to argue, as she never meant to insult him like that. However, The player knew full well that he would say the same thing to himself if he were in her shoes. After all, he had a reason for requesting the sparring session. He had some ideas on how to win, and the lady thought that the boy's path to victory lay precisely in mastering the art of the fist. Looking at the teacher, Yu Baek-jun saw curiosity shining in her eyes, but he wanted to know exactly what caught her interest. He actually knew that teacher Han-sun was unique, as most members of the Holy Sword clan showed no interest in anything unrelated to swords. But she's different from the rest, focused on other aspects of fighting and ready to use anything, like magic, to become stronger. But she was just being cautious because of her role as a teacher, so he understood she was probably surprised that the heir knew how to fight with his fists. The girl also reminded that in the Holy Sword clan, one only needs to master the art of the sword. However, Yu Baek-jun didn't recall this being an unwritten rule. In the past, the god of war used swords, fist techniques, spears, even bows and arrows. He mastered every fighting style, so the player couldn't understand why the clan limited itself to just swords. Han Sona tried to justify it somehow, but Yu Baek-jun asked her to listen to him. He admitted he had no intention of following such a silly rule, and would study anything that could make him stronger. And clearly he met with a very interested look from the lady. Yu Baek-jun himself understood that the clan's situation was due to the god of war leaving only sword techniques behind, but no one knows why. Besides, the god of war has never actually appeared in the game himself. At that moment, the teacher realized that the player could afford this mindset because he wasn't limited by the clan's training methods. Of course, she wasn't a perfect teacher, but she could help Yu Baek-jun with his training. Basically, that's exactly the curiosity from Han Sona he was aiming for all along. Of course, the warrior reminded the teacher that everyone in the clan despised him, and if she took on his training, she would be despised too. However, she was already an outcast in that clan. Besides, although it might seem harsh since both are looked down upon, if she becomes his mentor, nothing will really change. The guy knew full well that other teachers would come up with any excuse to refuse training him. So the player was very surprised that the woman said yes despite who he was. Most likely it wasn't because people looked down on her too, since she didn't care. She simply had no other students. Besides, she was a talented teacher, and the guy decided not to pass up the chance, since he had always wanted to be her student. He knew the teacher was a skilled hunter with the potential to become a magical swordsman. And since she handled mana so well, learning his energy circulation techniques would only benefit her. At that moment, the woman's expression and tone changed as she instructed them to wait for her at the training ground. Yu Baek-jun nervously tried to explain that it was already late and suggested starting the training tomorrow. However, Han Sona couldn't stand the young master's weakness and couldn't understand how he planned to defeat his older brother with such an attitude. And then, Yu Baek-jun remembered the most important thing he had forgotten about this woman. That she becomes a completely different person when she starts teaching. Only at dawn did the woman let the hero go so he could get some rest. All night, she told the guy that the clan's main technique was the mind soaring to the heavens, which took time to master. This technique was handed down by the god of war himself, so it was believed that no technique could surpass it. However, Han Sona decided to teach Yu Baek-jun a slightly modified version of her technique, infusing a bit of mana into his body so he could focus on how the teacher controlled it. Soon they began the planned procedure. However, the teacher immediately noticed something strange about the size of the student's dantian. It's no surprise he could maintain his qigong technique for such a long time. His dantian capacity was unlike that of a beginner just starting to learn mind cultivation methods. While manipulating mana, she could sense a person's life energy and how balanced their physical body was. Feeling the hero's body, it seemed as if his very being was a gift from the heavens. At that moment, Yu Baek-jun distracted the teacher because he realized what she was doing and decided to try it himself. And obviously, the girl immediately decided to help him. As you know, mastering this cultivation technique takes countless hours of training and battle experience, especially since the young master has avoided martial arts his whole life. Of course, Han Sona understood that innate traits, like the size of his dantian or the potential stored in his physical form, set him completely apart from the other newcomers. But she decided not to judge him too harshly and to wait and see the results. While the lady trained with the hero, she recalled how the senior instructors and teachers, who had chosen to serve a specific heir, mocked her every time, and she felt that these people cared more about gaining power than truly mastering martial arts. However, what she saw in the young master was unlike anyone else. She realized this heir was truly the perfect student. He perfectly recreated what he had seen only once. He truly had an incredible talent. It seemed he might even hold the greatest talent among all his brothers and sisters. And now she realized, if the young master was determined to defy the clan's 1,000-year-old rules, maybe he just might succeed. At first, she never intended to back any particular heir. However, I decided to watch how Yu Baek-jun would navigate his long and challenging journey. The player, heading back to their room, glanced over their system window. He was happy to have gained a new skill. It was pretty easy, and it seemed like he could never get enough of free skills. His plan was to train his fist skills instead of swordsmanship, and also to make the woman interested in him. And of course, she had to realize that he possessed an extraordinary talent. As soon as he met all the requirements, the woman was supposed to teach him 2 skills. One of these techniques, called mind soaring to the heavens, was created by the god of war and involved gathering mana and activating the body's energy, with the quality of the mana improved thanks to modifications made by Han Sona. Of course, it seemed like Yu Baekjun handled everything with ease, but meeting the task's requirements and catching Han Sun's interest was no simple feat. And even if he succeeded, the woman from his past would have walked away if he lacked real talent. Still, in this life, he had an otherworldly talent. She simply couldn't ignore such a genius. By this point, the hero had only 1 day left before the scheduled sparring match. Everyone watched the hero's training, amazed at how tireless he was. It felt like he was training so hard he might collapse from exhaustion even before the sparring began. Han Sona trained alongside him, guiding the young master on how to best use Qigong techniques. And so they ran across the field, building the hero's endurance. The newcomers saw that the gentleman was truly putting in a lot of effort, and many were surprised by the teacher's strict and demanding nature, something they had never expected. Their grueling training only ended when the sun began to dip below the horizon. Han Sona decided not to push the hero too hard that day, knowing he needed to be in top physical and mental shape by the next morning. And Yu Baekjun was very grateful for Han Seon's help, as he had learned a lot from her during those days. Even Han Sona was surprised that the heir completed her entire training without a single complaint. But it was all thanks to her encouragement. On his own, the player would have surely given up under the relentless, inhuman pressure. He also asked the woman to stay close and keep training him, as he still had a lot to work on, especially the mental techniques and Qigong skills she had recently taught him. Of course, she agreed. But she just couldn't believe that Yu Baekjun really needed to work on anything else. The key point is that, just like with the mind technique that calls to the heavens, he can use any technique exactly as shown on the very first try. She was still surprised that Yu Baekjun kept insisting someone like him had no talent. At that moment, a loud explosion rocked the training ground, drawing the attention of everyone passing by. The eldest brother, Yu Kan-ho, burst through the gates, and even before they met, the player immediately understood why the third brother had come here. For this reason, as soon as he stood up, he immediately asked his teacher not to get involved. Then he stepped back a little to keep his furious brother from hitting Han Sonu. And of course, he let him land the first punch, which hit him right on the cheek. Yu Kan-ho grabbed his brother by the collar and shook him fiercely, thinking he was mocking or teasing him, while Yu Baekjun pretended not to understand what was going on. It turned out that Yu Kan-ho expected his younger brother to go to their father and back out of the sparring match. The truth is, everyone knows there's no way Yu Baekjun could ever beat his older brother. Moreover, even Yu Kan-ho found it incredibly humiliating to fight against such a rookie. However, the player firmly grasped his brother's hand and asked him to stop being so anxious. He even thought that maybe Yu Kan-ho was shouting and worrying so much because he really didn't want to lose. Anyway, the warrior reminded them that their father had already approved this fight, which means it's something neither of them can resist. And then, furious, Yu Kan-ho realized he shouldn't have come here. He promised that he and Yu Baekjun would meet and talk tomorrow. However, he reminded them that their clan has no rule forbidding taking an opponent's life during sparring. And obviously he asked Yu Baekjun to prepare as best as he could just to survive tomorrow. As the third brother walked away, his friends quickly gathered around him, admiring just how cool he was. Then they started joking and guessing how many seconds the young master Yu Baekjun could actually hold out in a fight. And so this intense day came to an end, and finally, the long-awaited sparring day arrived. Soon the eldest and fourth heirs arrived at the testing site. When they looked back at the arena, they immediately realized Yu Kan-ho had already arrived, but Yu Baekjun was still nowhere to be seen. Then the older sister shifted her gaze to the senior instructors. Everyone knew they supported their eldest brother. However, there was one person who caught the older sister's keen attention. She was a female instructor we needed to win over to our side. At that very moment, Yu Baekjun stepped into the arena. Everyone was quite surprised to see instructor Han Sun right beside him. Even his older sister didn't understand what the woman had forgotten beside him. At that moment, the player noticed a magical barrier had been raised in the air above the field for protection. He was grateful for it, but it was a shame the fence still let the cold through, even if it did hold back the snow. At that moment, when Yu Baekjun turned to the teacher, he saw that she was very excited. Of course, she never thought Yu Baekjun would lose after all the training. She had seen his hard work and amazing progress. However, the third young gentleman still seemed too harsh, and she couldn't help but feel uneasy about it. She was even worried that if Yu Baekjun won, he might come out of the fight injured, and Yu Baekjun was truly surprised by her concern and reaction. Right now, Hansono was acting as if she were his official teacher. At that moment, the arena buzzed with excitement as the clan leader arrived. So, Yu Baekjun realized it was best to pause the conversation for now, since he needed time to prepare. Then he decided to share something interesting with his teacher. His older brother has loved exploring all kinds of places since childhood, and everyone already knows about it. One day, he encountered a monster that severely injured his right arm. They said he was barely cured, and now she was his greatest weakness. Besides, the hero had a mission from the system, to teach Yu Kanho a lesson for bullying Yu Baekjun, earning 300 points and a mention in the War God's book. Then the player looked at the clan leader Yu Mu-hak, seated in his place, hoping that Han Son would no longer be worried. As soon as the man nodded to his assistant, he immediately bowed. Then he stepped closer to the arena and announced the start of the sparring match, and both participants immediately took their positions. The player immediately put on gloves specially made for fist fighting. At that moment, his furious brother grabbed his sword. Looking at his opponent, the warrior saw he was clearly in great fighting shape, just as he had expected. He was furious and wanted only one thing: to kill his brother right here and now, no matter the cost. As soon as the battle began, Yu Kanho vanished from where he was standing. He charged at the hero with his sword, using the blurring sword rising to the heavens technique. 9 dragon's fangs. Of course, he knew he hadn't fully mastered the technique yet, but it should be enough to catch the guy off guard. After all, someone with no martial arts training wouldn't be able to dodge it. However, Yu Baekjun had no intention of running away. He was ready to block the incoming blows with his fists. He remembered how, in the past, he had put all his effort into completing the game using Yu Baekjun's path. Of course, he spent a long time wondering what he needed to do to win the fight against Yu Kanho. He had no one to ask about it. After all, no one in the world had ever taken on the role of Yu Baekjun. And then, in a moment of dead-end frustration, a sudden idea finally struck him. Of course, the chance was slim, but it could have helped him. The game had a fun feature, combining skills. Just before the sparring match, he suddenly remembered it while sitting in his room. He said goodbye to Choi Sung-min, sending him off to bed, then sat down to think. Then he summoned his system and tried to figure out how to combine his skills to defeat Yu Kanho. And that's how he combined his skills to create a new move, the Earth Strike, that sends dust and stones flying at his enemy. Of course, Yu Kanho was sure that such crappy equipment would never affect him, but the bleeding wound was already visible on his face. Then the player imbued the stones with his ice power, and dispersed the incoming attacks aimed at him. Small broken stones also started pelting the enemy's body with light blows. He was just angry, thinking the enemy was trying to pull some dirty tricks. But at that very moment, Yu Baekjun had already landed a strike technique right to his opponent's face. The guy was thrown back but never let go of his sword for a single moment. Gripping his brother's hand tighter, the player pressed on with the attack. Since he was his right-hand man, the warrior immediately punished his brother with a painful strike to a sore spot. Then he made him kneel down amid the crowd's surprised gasps. But even so, the brothers' desperate fight went on. No matter how hard he tried, the player easily dodged attacks using a swift step technique that allowed him to instantly jump a set distance. Besides, he was truly shocked by how weak his older brother was. He threatened to kill him, but at this rate, he hadn't even left a scratch on him throughout the entire fight. Even Yu Kanho felt ashamed. He was furious, unable to understand when Yu Baekjun had become so powerful. At that moment, the player calmly reminded his brother why their father had always let him get away with such silly antics. The thing was, the third brother was so talented that he could easily defeat all the other rivals. To be honest, Yu Baekjun didn't understand their father's point of view. His younger brother was seen as untalented, yet after just a week of training, he easily outperformed the so-called talented one. Enraged by the harsh truth he just heard, the young man immediately tried to defeat the hero with a slicing attack called the Moon Slash. And the player immediately charged at the attack, fists ready. Yu Kanho knew this was his chance. His arrogant younger brother's pride would be his downfall, and his hands would be torn apart. To the boy's shock, Yu Baekjun used a display of power by harnessing the fire attribute. In the end, with just one punch, he managed to completely stop the attack coming straight at him. Then he charged at his brother, reminding him of the truth. Only the strong survive in the clan of the Holy Sword. The strong hunt the weak, and the weak are devoured by the strong. At the crucial moment of the battle, the young warrior revealed the true power of his skill. Skillfully blending showmanship with the devastating strike technique, he delivered a final, fatal blow straight to his older brother's body. The burst of energy was so blinding and powerful that even the seasoned mentor Han Sun was engulfed in darkness, unable to see anything within the whirlwind of destructive force. As the veil of energy lifted, the duel ended with a triumphant victory for the younger heir. The guy realized with irony that he had completed the family's disgrace task, and the system generously rewarded him with 300 precious experience points added to his spiritual storehouse, while his knowledge in the sacred book of the God of War reached a new level. The victor looked down with deep satisfaction at the defeated enemy lying at his feet. At that moment, a sudden surge of power struck his mind like lightning. He had become far stronger than ever before. This meant one thing: power, a luxurious mansion, vast wealth, and everything the third brother had owned now rightfully belonged to him as the victor. Such was the unbreakable tradition of their ancient clan. Even seasoned instructors stood frozen in silent amazement. This young man hasn't just mastered the powerful energy of the attributes, he's fully harnessed its destructive force, all without showing the slightest sign of strain. Of course, some people had heard whispers that the boy was helped by teacher Hansong herself, but the wise woman only taught him the basics of energy flow and the fundamental principles of ki. It turned out that no one had taught him hand-to-hand combat techniques or methods to boost his inner energy. So it seemed almost unbelievable that the young warrior had reached such an astonishing level of mastery all on his own. The older sister watching the fight knew well that even the most gifted genius couldn't pull off such miracles, especially since her younger brother had never shown the slightest hint of such extraordinary talent before. She also knew about her father's many attempts to train the boy from a very young age, and perhaps the head of the family was right in his instincts. This young man truly held an extraordinary power within him. Just as the player was about to leave the training hall, a commanding order came from the head. Yu Baekjun had to report to the family leader's chambers immediately. However, the winner had no idea about the challenge ahead, simply glad that the exhausting battle had finally ended with a good outcome. Han Sona let out a deep sigh of relief, having feared that Yu Baekjun might get seriously hurt in the fight. But not only did he win decisively, he came out completely unscathed. It was truly an amazing result, worthy of the legends of great warriors from the past. And looking at his mentor, the young fighter suddenly realized that if he asked for her protection, she would agree to help him without hesitation. Since the woman would soon officially become his teacher, he wisely decided not to rush things. At this solemn moment, a servant approached the hero respectfully and informed him that the head of the family wished to meet with him alone immediately. Yu Baekjun clearly understood his father's true intentions. He would definitely want to know in detail under whose guidance and which powerful master he had learned the secrets of martial arts. So the young man promised to appear right after he changed into clothes more suitable for the audience. Casting a final glance at his fallen brother, the victor knew skilled healers would surely tend to him. Since the younger sibling, once seen as the weakest and only training with commoners, beat the eldest heir, the young man's reputation is bound to be shattered. This meant Yu Baekjun could take even more power and privileges from him than before. So he was determined not only to earn his father's trust and respect, but also to completely destroy his older brother's influence in the near future. After some time, the player solemnly entered the luxurious chambers of the head of the Yu Mu Hak family, who sat surrounded by 4 powerful clan instructors. As soon as the young man stepped inside, he respectfully dropped to his knees before his father, showing deep reverence for the head of their ancient family. The head of the family thoughtfully recalled how, not long ago, the boy had passionately expressed his desire to learn martial arts. He also reminded everyone that the senior teachers initially believed the clan's offspring had absolutely no talent for learning. Now the father wanted to find out from his son if he truly possessed the true gift of a warrior. The young man was stunned that even after today's triumphant battle, he still had to prove his worth. After Yu Mu Hak was fully convinced that his youngest son possessed not only extraordinary talent, but also the true spirit of an unbeatable warrior, he issued an important warning. 4 instructors cannot train one student at the same time. If the senior mentor refuses to train the apprentice must accept that decision without objection. According to the clan's sacred laws, all pillars must be under the constant watch of the leader's closest blood relatives. The player quickly realized the leader's true intention. He would force him to choose just one of the 4 pillars as his sole mentor. The young man was fully aware of the harsh reality. 3 of the powerful instructors were already backing the first heir. Even if he humbly asks them for protection, they will either ruthlessly refuse or teach him completely useless techniques, sabotaging his progress. To trigger the key event, he had only one option left, so the young strategist chose the sole neutral instructor, the senior mentor, Ja-en. It seemed even the wisest woman was genuinely surprised by his unexpected choice. As everyone in the clan knows, Ja-en was the most experienced and skilled of the 4 senior combat instructors, faithfully serving Yu Mu Hak for decades and dedicating her life to advancing the clan's swordsmanship. This remarkable master devoted herself to deep studies of many martial arts schools, choosing to focus her energy and knowledge on perfecting the clan's sacred sword art and nurturing new generations of talented warriors, rather than getting caught up in endless power struggles among heirs. Among her many students, some reached the highest level of skill and became combat instructors themselves. For example, her most famous student was none other than Han Sona. If we judge the mentor by key criteria like nurturing exceptional talents, revolutionizing the art of fencing and contributing to the clan's prosperity. She was rightfully seen as the most respected and influential instructor in the entire family. That's why the young strategist chose her as his mentor without a second thought. The clan leader immediately shot a piercing glance at Ja-en, eager to see what fateful choice she would make in this delicate situation. The other instructors secretly knew she would never accept the hero as her student. Although mastering the aura in such a short time is truly impressive and admirable, the Iron Woman never took heirs as students, and even young Master Yu Tae-ran was taught only the basics of fencing, nothing more. Of course, Yu Baek-jun couldn't have known these details since he spent his whole life as a recluse in his rooms. However, before giving her final verdict, the wise woman wanted to confirm something herself. So, she gracefully approached the young gentleman and asked for permission to thoroughly assess his abilities. The player clearly understood her true intention. The mentor wanted to see if he truly had a talent for martial arts. The result exceeded even the boldest expectations. The young man thought the woman would be impressed by his potential, but the reality was even more striking. Ya-eun felt the same overwhelming realization as her talented student Han's son had earlier. Yu Baek-jun's body was perfectly made for mastering martial arts. The other instructors eagerly wanted to understand exactly what their colleague meant. Of course, the wise woman didn't keep them waiting long for an explanation. She solemnly declared that after careful examination, she could confidently say the youngest heir's physique was perfect for martial arts, a rare gift that appears once in a millennium. The head of the family immediately sought to learn Ja-en's final decision about accepting the fifth heir as his student. The strict mentor briefly recalled how, until now, she had always refused the humble pleas for guidance from various heirs. Not wanting to get involved in the toxic power struggles over inheritance, she always stayed clear of political intrigue. But now this wise woman must break her long-held principles and take Yu Baek-jun as her personal student. The head of the family, of course, kindly agreed that the respected mentor should act according to her own will and wisdom. Now that the instructor was chosen, everyone except Ja-yeon herself could quietly leave. However, Yu Baek-jun was eager to make one more very important request to his powerful father. He also wanted permission to use the clan's treasury freely, without any restrictions. The thing was, all the eldest heirs could freely spend the family money on whatever they wanted or needed. However, Yu Baek-jun, like some kind of inferior orphan, could only ever take enough resources to barely survive throughout his entire life. In other words, if the clan leader kindly allows him full control over the family finances, it will officially recognize him as a full member of the ancient lineage. Of course, Yu Baek-jun was perfectly happy in the past living a simple life without big expenses. But now everything has changed completely. There are so many important goals he wants to invest in generously. To everyone's great surprise, the head of the family graciously agreed to transfer all the financial assets previously owned by Yu Kan-ho to his youngest son. He also firmly ordered the loyal servants of the third son to strictly forbid him from using these resources until he had learned his hard life lesson. Obviously, the frightened servants desperately tried to explain to their master that such a punishment seemed too harsh and severe. However, they were met only with their master's completely cold and deeply displeased expression. For this reason, the frightened maids were forced to fall silent immediately, too afraid to argue any further. The head calmly reminded them of a harsh truth. His son had brought this humiliating situation upon himself. The third heir began living too lazily and carefree, completely neglecting serious training and the improvement of his combat skills. The boy clearly had a talent for martial arts, which is why his father let him do whatever his carefree heart desired. But he reminded everyone not to forget who truly won the decisive match today. The clan leader solemnly reminded them that they all belonged to the legendary Holy Sword clan, and that his third son had become unacceptably weak. There was simply no place for weaklings in their ancient lineage. After those stern but fair words, he immediately asked everyone except the wise Ja-en to leave his sacred chambers at once. As soon as they were alone, the head of the family honestly admitted to his old ally that he had no idea how things had come to such an incredible turn of events. A sharp woman immediately guessed that the conversation was about the mysterious abilities of the young master. No matter how much the wise mentor pondered this puzzle, she couldn't find a clear answer to the troubling question. Throughout her many years of service, she trained countless talented young men and women, but none possessed a gift even remotely close to the incredible abilities of the young master. It seemed this mysterious boy's natural talent could rival even the family head in his youth. Even for Yu Mu-hak himself, this turn of events was extremely strange and inexplicable. He had closely watched the boy grow over the years, and such a sudden transformation seemed almost magical, like something out of a mystery. But until that fateful day, the head of the family had never seen even a hint of true talent in his youngest son. Yu Mu-hak clearly remembered how the boy lost consciousness for several days after that terrifying monster attack. and the family head felt that something crucial might have happened to his son during that mysterious blackout. Of course, the wise Jain was fully aware that such a possibility truly existed. But such incredible changes didn't upset the leader. In fact, he liked knowing that Yu Baek-jun could become another unpredictable factor in the endless power struggle among the heirs. Meanwhile, the player sat alone in the luxurious rooms of his mansion. He had just 2 precious days left to fully recover from the exhausting sparring before beginning his fateful training under the wise guidance of the legendary Ja-en. The young warrior carefully examined his system window, where he had just earned a long-awaited level up, and, with that triumph, gained the chance to spend his points on unlocking brand new abilities. In the past, a young mage could only learn skills when the sacred book was at the first basic rank. But now that it has advanced to the 2nd rank of power, they have unlocked access to unique abilities. The traits were essentially innate human talents, like developing ironclad immunity to deadly poisons or significantly boosting the speed of precious mana recovery. The system offered many incredibly useful features, but they came at a significantly higher cost than regular skills. But more importantly, some key events could only be triggered when Yu Baek-jun gained the right trait for the specific situation. He still had a month and a half before his older brother's inevitable return from his travels, and as soon as he came back home, there was no doubt he would make the younger heir his primary target for revenge. For this reason, before the arrival of his senior rival, Yu Baek-jun had to become as powerful as possible within a very short time. The time has come to make a bold change and adapt to the harsh realities of this new world of power and intrigue. Of course, before his official debut in high society, Yu Baek-jun wisely chose to secretly share some important information with his loyal servant, Choi Seung-min. The loyal assistant was deeply intrigued by his master's request to find out which rare items would be featured at the prestigious auction taking place next week at the famous Somnium venue. The key was that The Hero's Journey was a complex game where the story and environment changed drastically after every move, and even following the same path could alter important details like item prices or enemy stats. This meant that if he, like a game character, tried to act personally, it would inevitably trigger an even bigger butterfly effect in the fragile chain of events. So it was much safer and wiser to have his loyal Choi Seung-min carry out his delicate tasks. Soon, all the funds that had belonged to the 3rd heir were actually delivered to the hero. And even though the young strategist had high hopes, what he saw exceeded his wildest dreams, and that impressive pile of shining gold was just the beginning of generous surprises. A respectful man approached the young gentleman and solemnly handed him a personal black card of exclusive status, one that only 0.1% of the most influential people in the entire clan possessed. Though their famed clan lived high on an unreachable mountain far from the noisy world, their vast wealth was no small matter, as their family traded all the treasures gained from monster hunts in ancient ruins, extending their financial power well beyond their homeland. The player suddenly remembered that he had earlier asked his loyal assistant, Choi Seung-min, to deliver this card to him. The young man quickly grasped the importance of the girl delivering the map to him in person and was completely right in his suspicions. From this moment on, she officially became his personal tutor. In the strict clan hierarchy, the title of official teacher meant that Han Sona would teach only him, dedicating all her knowledge and time exclusively to him. Although she officially held the title of teacher, her duties were more like those of a prestigious personal secretary and mentor. However, Yu Baek-jun was thrilled with this turn of events, as this remarkable young woman was one of the most talented and promising teachers in the entire clan. She was exactly the person he desperately needed on his path to greatness. And such an outstanding individual had willingly offered to be his mentor, so the player genuinely felt it was a great honor and privilege. Soon the young man retreated to his room to quietly read and prepare for the challenges ahead. He knew he would need to focus fully on grueling training and honing his combat skills for a while, so the wise strategist decided to learn 1 or 2 useful new abilities while he still had the chance. As he flipped through the pages of his sacred book of the God of War, he discovered a skill called Stimulator, which would allow his body to endure incredible strain for long periods and quickly recover lost strength. This was a special S-rank skill costing 300 precious points, much more expensive than regular skills, but worth every single point spent. Since Yu Baek-jun no longer had the ginseng buff, this ability would definitely come in handy soon. Until now, he could train day and night thanks to the miraculous powers of the rarest ginseng. But a wise warrior knows he can't rely on such mystical remedies forever. Overall, considering his unique traits, this skill now suited him perfectly. Every player knows that in Path of Heroes, there were 2 main ways to gain new skills. The first and toughest was grueling training under the guidance of experienced masters. The second involved studying rare skill books, sacred texts that held all the essential techniques, and simply reading them granted the owner new abilities. The only problem was that skill books were incredibly rare treasures. Of course, finding books for the lower ranks was fairly easy, but when it came to high-level skills, tracking them down became a real epic challenge. That's why training was a much more popular way to improve skills, since skill books relied more on luck. But because Yu Baek-jun already had the legendary Book of the God of War, he could use this method whenever he wanted. Besides, having the chance to train as the heir of the famous Holy Sword clan was an incredible advantage over ordinary adventurers. Lost in deep thoughts about his future, he slowly made his way to a large training ground where many students from different masters were diligently practicing. Right away, the observant Ja-en noticed him and politely greeted the young master Yu Baek-jun. She then kindly asked him to join the other students for the group training session. But first, they needed to have a private conversation alone to discuss the details of the upcoming training. Ja-en warmly offered Yu Baek-jun a cup of fragrant warm tea and gently reminded him of his passionate desire to learn the art of combat from her. They have now come together to clearly determine exactly what he aims to learn under her wise guidance. After a calm pause to gather his thoughts, Yu Baek-jun clearly explained that his main interest was in hand-to-hand combat techniques, which is why he came to her with this special request, to learn the ancient methods of fist fighting. It was a completely unexpected request that stunned the wise Ja-en, leaving her frozen in amazement. The thing was, the usual heirs of their famous clan always wanted to focus solely on sword techniques, the sacred symbol of the Holy Sword clan's martial arts, as well as the art mastered by every single student and blood relative without exception. The sword technique that soars into the sky is powerful on its own, but it becomes even more devastating as the wielder's skill grows. The mentor believed that such an unconventional choice clearly didn't suit a true member of the Holy Sword clan, who was expected to honor the age-old traditions of their lineage. However, the wise player patiently explained that he was fully aware of everything, including the fact that fist techniques traditionally don't suit the heirs of their ancient family. However, he reassured the worried Ja-en by making it clear that he had no intention of giving up the sacred art of the sword entirely. For him, fist techniques were just the beginning of a grand journey of growth. An ambitious young man dreamed of mastering every martial art, just like the legendary God of War did in ancient times, and he was determined to learn and use everything that could make him an unbeatable warrior. After saying this, he looked deeply into the shocked instructor's sharp eyes and decided to explain in detail why he had chosen her as his mentor. The young strategist had heard that she had spent many years studying the various martial arts used by the God of War himself in legendary battles. He rightly believed that this priceless knowledge would be invaluable on his challenging journey, so he was eager for her to be his wise guide. Of course, the experienced Ja-en was genuinely stunned by what was happening. Every word the boy said sounded like he knew all her hidden powers and secret research inside out. The player just smiled mysteriously, recalling how many times he had played this game in past cycles, confident he knew the instructor's character and abilities almost perfectly. In the end, the wise lady agreed to his unusual request, and as the insightful Yu Baek-jun expected, she was indeed well-versed in ancient fist-fighting techniques. The mentor eagerly shared how she discovered them during her daring travels around the world in search of lost scrolls and forgotten knowledge. However, there was one serious problem the honest woman couldn't ignore. She only found fragmented notes on ancient techniques, just a small piece of what was once a great teaching. This meant the technology was still imperfect and needed more research to fully restore its power. The wise mentor chose to be completely honest with the young heir. If he truly wants to become genuinely strong in the shortest time, he should definitely learn the time-tested sword technique known as the Sky Soar. But even after such a clear warning, stubborn Yu Baek-jun didn't change his firm decision. So he insisted that Ja-eun teach him the basic fist-fighting techniques, despite all their flaws. Seeing the boy's unwavering determination and eagerness to learn, the experienced instructor simply couldn't say no to such a driven student. For this reason, they soon headed to the large training ground, where the other skilled clan fighters were hard at work honing their skills. Even a casual glance made it clear that this was a gathering of truly gifted warriors, each striving to reach new heights of skill. At that moment, the wise Ja-en majestically approached the special training dummy to clearly teach Yu Baek-jun 2 basic moves of the ancient art. As she sadly explained earlier, most hand-to-hand combat techniques were lost forever during the great disasters of the past, leaving only a few scattered moves preserved to this day. With a graceful touch to the magical control column, the skilled instructor expertly summoned 4 training dummies onto the field. All the students immediately stopped their exercises, rightly believing that the instructor was about to show something truly rare, as such demonstrations were very rare and always drew everyone's attention. Sharp-eyed observers also noticed that the legendary craftswoman was accompanied by a young gentleman himself, making the scene even more intriguing and meaningful. At that moment, a familiar system window appeared before the hero, presenting the young warrior with a new task: to flawlessly replicate the skill demonstrated by the wise Ja-en, earning him the respect of those around him. and 200 valuable experience points. The experienced player found the upcoming challenge easy, having completed similar tasks many times in previous cycles. At that moment, the stern Ja-en asked the hero to focus completely and get ready, as she was about to demonstrate a basic move from an ancient art called the Mighty Sky Breaker. With her very first move, the instructor instantly focused glowing mana around her graceful hand, skillfully shaping a halo of destructive energy. Then she unleashed her powerful attack straight at the nearest training dummy, ready to show the true strength of the ancient martial art. But the energy swirling around her hand transformed into a majestic flying dragon that soared straight toward the training dummy. When these two forces collided, a massive explosion erupted, and Yu Baek-jun realized that, true to its fearsome name, this technique truly held devastating power. The experienced instructor calmly explained that due to its incredible power, this move requires an enormous amount of energy. An average person shouldn't even try to do this without proper training. After that warning, she decided to demonstrate the second move of the ancient technique to him. To do this, the wise mentor had to test the hero and gave him a special mannequin. The young man needed to provoke the magical mannequins into attacking, specifically to make them shoot spheres of concentrated mana. Ja-en gently touched the mannequin and began infusing it with her energy. As soon as the doll was fully charged with power, it immediately attacked the nearest target. The woman warned the hero instantly, and he managed to shield himself with his hand at the last moment. As Ja-en expected, the attack wasn't strong enough to seriously hurt the young warrior, but it still burned his skin a little. However, Yu Baek-jun was genuinely surprised. Why did the mannequin shoot right at him? He didn't remember anything like that in the game's script. Noticing the young man's anxiety, wise Ja-en explained that she brought up the topic to demonstrate the second movement. She asked him not to get distracted and to watch her actions closely. In this thrilling moment, the three surviving dolls launched a simultaneous attack on their mentor, with spheres of mana. The woman stood focused, seemingly unaware of the threatening attacks around her. Then she skillfully absorbed all the mana her enemies attacked her with and fired back a powerful shot. In the end, 3 shots hit their marks, shattering the dolls to pieces. The students stood with mouths wide open in amazement. None of them had guessed that senior instructor Ja-en mastered such rare martial arts, and many wouldn't even dare to try something like that. The craftswoman explained that she had skillfully deflected the attack. The move was called the reverse strike. It looked as powerful as the Skybreaker, but it was much harder to perform. Yu Baek-jun knew very well that only those with exceptional mana control could master this skill. It's an incredibly useful technique that can come in handy in many situations. Unfortunately, Ja-en never had the chance to use this skill in real combat, but she believed it could be invaluable in battles against mages. Now it's time for Yu Baek-jun to try performing these difficult moves. Obviously, Ya-eun was amazed that he was ready to replicate the skills shown just once, without any prior practice. The other students watching from afar wondered what the two were talking about, and why the young gentleman had stayed so close to the lady instructor. However, one of the trainees explained that recently, Yu Baek-jun asked the senior instructor Ja-yeon to teach him martial arts, and apparently, the clan leader approved after his triumphant victory over Yu Kan-ho. Clearly, even hearing this argument, the others found it hard to believe such nonsense. They thought the youngest heir was incapable of anything. But at that moment, they noticed the lead instructor had started doing something, setting up a new doll. Ja-in suggested starting his training with the second movement. Despite her suggestion, she had no idea what the boy was thinking. He claimed he could perform the move after seeing it just once. Moreover, she disliked how the students who hadn't been at his sparring match with Yu Kan-ho openly looked down on the young man without even trying to hide it. If he fails now, they'll just mock him even more. But Yu Baek-jun wasn't worried at all because he had already finished his preparation and knew exactly what he needed to do to learn the new skill. The first step is to practice or use a skill book. Next, you need to complete training either with an expert or on your own. No matter what method a person chooses, hard training is inevitable. It's the only way to truly master the skills. But Yu Baek-jun's path was completely different because he possessed the legendary Book of the God of War. So when the attacks came flying at him, the young man managed to absorb them using the reverse strike technique. Then he released all the energy he had gathered, creating a fiery dragon. Soon, a powerful explosion shook the room, and the charred head of the mannequin rolled right to the stunned student's feet. Ja-en still couldn't believe what had happened. She was also called a genius, and she had spent a great deal of time mastering this technique. But Yu Baek-jun didn't just copy her move, he even outdid her. By doing so, he completed his task and earned the well-deserved points as a reward. Ja-en praised the hero's talent. She never expected him to use the absorbed mana for the Skybreaker. Of course, Yu Baek-jun appreciated the praise, but he felt that Ja-eun was clearly overestimating his abilities. He made it clear that, compared to the instructor, he had too little mana, so he decided to use energy drawn from an external source. But even so, looking at the craters left on the ground, he knew his strike wasn't quite precise. Although his Skybreaker was impressive, it wasn't nearly as effective as his mentor's. At that moment, Jia Yan openly admitted that she had thought the young gentleman was very talented from the very first meeting. Over the years, she has taught many students, but none could compare to the hero, and she likely won't meet anyone as gifted in the future. The woman wasn't even sure she could teach him enough, and it turned out she didn't have the courage to be his teacher. The player knew exactly what the woman would say, since he had completed the genius mission flawlessly. This quest had a hidden feature. Depending on how you completed the task, the reward and the next related mission would change. The heir of the god of war is one of the possible quests, and now, based on the teacher's words, he has received a new mission. If he continues training with the senior instructor, he'll earn the Ghost Steps skill, a move warriors often use. Yu Baekjun was going to buy it sooner or later anyway, but getting it as a reward felt even better. But the young man knew there was a serious catch hidden in this task. At that moment, Ja-en realized she wanted to keep training the hero and explained the Ghost Steps technique, a skill that buys the user the crucial time needed to unleash the Skybreaker. So she decided they needed to learn it right away. However, the training will be incredibly challenging, especially since Yu Baekjun has already proven his brilliance. This is how the week went when Yu Baekjun worked hard, sweating it out. After every workout, he would lie on the ground, completely unable to move a single muscle in his body. Even Ja-en was exhausted but praised his progress, amazed at how much he had improved in just 1 week. However, Yu Baekjun had to admit that his skill level was nowhere near that of the instructor. Chu Jun-won appeared here and just laughed at the boy. He thought it was a bit arrogant that after just a week of training, the young man already aimed to match the senior instructor's strength. Obviously, Ja-en wasn't surprised to see the skilled pharmacist and greeted the guest politely. It turned out that Chu Jun-won came to visit the young master and brought him medicine to help with his exhaustion. At that moment, Han Sona respectfully bowed and greeted her teacher, but Ja-en was curious about the reason for their visit. Only then did the girl realize her mentor still had much to learn, so she calmly explained that she had become Yu Baekjun's personal teacher. This took the experienced instructor by surprise. She reminded the student that she planned to stay neutral even after becoming a teacher herself. Han Sona shyly explained that her opinion had changed a bit and asked Ja Yan not to laugh at her because of it. However, the wise mentor wasn't mocking at all. She just wanted to tease her former student a little. Even so, Han Sona explained that she hadn't made her decision lightly and, after careful thought, chose to become the young master's teacher. Ja-en had no doubt that the girl had thought it through carefully. She had always trusted her good judgment. This conversation marked the end of the promised training by the senior instructor. However, the wise mentor reminded the young master that there was just over a month left before Master Yu Tae-ran's return. She clearly expected Yu Baekjun to also be vying for the clan leader position. But the player calmly explained that, although it wasn't his original plan, it was now too late to turn back. None of his older siblings will leave him alone once they find out he's not a weakling after all. Of course, the senior instructor tried to explain that the boy had a choice, to join a faction, just like one of the young gentlemen did. But Yu Baekjun just smiled, knowing he would never act that way. And intuitively, Ja-en knew there was no need to worry about this young man without a good reason. Besides, if the 3 younger heirs were still alive, things would have been much more complicated. But she still warned the young gentleman that the other heirs would never leave him alone. He should beware of young Master Yu Tae-ran and the elder lady, as both are fiercely determined to become the clan leader and will stop at nothing to achieve it. Of course, Yu Baekjun was already aware of this. He seemed to understand the balance of power even better than anyone else. In the end, the mentor admitted it was an honor to train such a student, who showed outstanding results throughout their sessions. And so, after a week of intense training, Yu Baekjun headed home with his personal coach. Along the way, the player couldn't help but think about his younger brothers and sister. At the start of the game, they were already dead. Officially, it was called an accident, but the player definitely knew the real truth. These two made it clear they aimed to fight for the clan leader's spot, but Yu Tae-ran killed them both and then covered up the whole tragedy. He tried to kill Yu Baekjun, even though he posed no threat or competition to anyone. But now that the youngest heir has revealed his true power, he's definitely become Yu Tae-ran's top target, so the hero has 1 more month to get a lot stronger. When the player came home, he saw Choi Sung-min's servant, who had clearly put on some weight. Caught off guard by the surprise, Yu Baekjun and Han Sun froze, unsure of what to say. After an awkward minute of silence, the guy let out a calm sigh and admitted that Choi Seung-min had scared him a little. Actually, the player had almost forgotten that there were story branches where this happened, and it occurred just as he was finishing his training with the instructor. However, Han Sona seemed not to recognize the young man, and immediately drew her blade, ready to deal with anyone daring to infiltrate the Holy Sword Clan. She didn't know why the stranger had come here, but she warned him that this room would be his grave. Of course, Yu Baekjun immediately ran to the mentor, explaining that it was Choi Seung-min, whom she simply didn't recognize. No matter how closely the woman looked at the figure, she couldn't recognize her familiar servant. She really had to strain to see any familiar features in that boy. When she finally realized it was really Choi Sung-min, changed so much in just a week, the girl nearly fainted from shock. Soon the young man placed a box of exquisite sweets before them. From the very first bite, Han-sun realized she had never tasted anything with such rich, deep flavor. Now she began to understand how Choi Sung-min managed to gain so much weight in just 1 week. But what surprised the servant even more was that the teacher had never tried such treats before. Hesitating slightly, she reminded that she had practically grown up in this clan, which wasn't surprising since they only ate healthy, wholesome food. The player understood that her words made sense. Han Sona was an orphan who had grown up in the clan, mostly left to fend for herself since childhood. Choi Sung-min also reported that over the past week, he managed to gather information about the auction taking place at the Somnium Bar. It looks like they'll be displaying the skins of rare animals there. Of course, he saved the invitation for his master. He took 2 just in case, so if one wasn't needed, it could be passed on to someone else. However, the player knew how hard Choi Sung-min had worked to get those 2 invitations, and it would be a shame not to use them. Then he decided to check the invitation ticket to find out exactly when the auction would start. Around this time, the action shifted to the Seoul branch of the Holy Sword clan. Then the manager learned that the young gentleman was planning a trip to Seoul. So, the branch manager decided to speed up the preparations and give the necessary orders to welcome the young gentleman. Around the same time, the player finally arrived in Seoul with his mentor. The woman felt awkward under everyone's intense stare, but it wasn't surprising given the outfit she chose to wear. Besides, considering how wary she was and how often she kept looking around, although Yoo Baek-jun asked her not to do that, saying it only makes her look more suspicious. The player also realized that the woman probably didn't come to Seoul very often. The reason was that she simply didn't have much need for it. The last time she was here was when she first became an instructor. She came to the Hunters Association to update her information after receiving her new status. Looking back, the player immediately spotted the very building, the Hunters Association. However, the mentor warned that it was just a nominal organization, and the young man began recalling the information from the game. As we know, hundreds of years ago, monsters and portals began to appear. Certain individuals, now known as hunters, formed groups and fought off monsters together. Survivor groups have evolved into guilds, magic towers, or clans like the Holy Sword clan. They are mainly driven by greed. This isn't just a hunters group. It's more like dark cults wielding more power than the government itself. But no one knew how the future would change once someone like him entered the world. Soon they arrived at the auction site. After showing their tickets to the inspector, they headed up to the correct floor. When the doors opened before them, the travelers saw a lavish hall filled with clearly wealthy guests. Judging by how everyone was talking to each other, they arrived on time and weren't late. Han Sona wandered with her mouth open. She never imagined such a luxurious space could exist underground. There were lots of hunters here, along with elegant decor and exquisite food, and it seemed like everyone had come just for the auction. Han Sona had no idea what kind of auction this was going to be. However, Yoo Baek-jun chose not to reveal his plans right away, and suggested going upstairs for a better view. Just then, the host welcomed the ladies and gentlemen to the Somnium auction. It's clear that rare items were sold here, not just from this world, but from other dimensions as well. The host warned that what they were about to show could only be obtained from special monsters in the specified worlds, and then decided to start the auction. First, an A-rank item brought from the Dark region was presented. Some hunters have already guessed what this might be about. Of course, it was a skills book! But not just any book. A magical skill book obtained from another world, in the Kingdom of Lebron on the continent of Fantasia. Just one look was enough for Yoo Baek-jun to realize that the book was actually pretty good. The starting price was 100 million, and the bids quickly began to soar. Looking at his mentor, the player saw her literally glowing as she gazed at the book. It was no surprise, given her natural talent for magic. The book caught her attention. It surely held some kind of high-ranking magical power. However, the player was eager to find the artifact he needed as quickly as possible. In an instant, one of the guests sharply raised the bet on the book to 1 billion. This is exactly what the player was waiting for. Now he could start placing his bets. Finally, they had one last item left, and the host thanked everyone for their patience. By the way, this was the main lot of their auction today. The monster came from the mountain, home to all kinds of the rarest creatures. The rarest creature among these monsters is the snow tiger. Just one look at the tiger's body filled Han-sun with an overwhelming surge of mana radiating from it. The host explained that the body was very fresh, almost lifelike, and right after death it was carefully treated, so the heart, the animal's source of mana, remained intact. People immediately got furious and demanded to know the starting price of this incredible creature. The starting price was 1 billion won! The stakes quickly rose and soon hit 2 billion. Even Han-sun was amazed at how everyone went wild like true maniacs. However, Yoo Baek-jun wasn't surprised, considering it was a snow tiger. Its skin, teeth, and heart are incredibly valuable and can bring great benefits. For this reason, even the player decided to place their bet. While the bids were around 3 billion, he suddenly jumped in with a 6 billion offer. Seeing everyone fall silent, he just gave a sinister smile, like a villain in a story. Even Han-sun was taken aback as she tried to explain to the young master that he shouldn't make such reckless expenses. Even though he can freely spend the clan's money, 6 billion is way too much, and the leader will be furious when he finds out. However, Yu Baek-jun asked not to worry about it. 6 billion wasn't such a huge amount for the clan leader. He was sure his father wouldn't object, as it was almost insignificant for their powerful family. But the bidding wasn't over. Unexpectedly, the stakes shot up again, soaring to 6.5 billion in just minutes. The player didn't expect such a buzz around the snow tiger carcass. It still wasn't enough to make the rivals give up. In this tense moment, Han-sun anxiously urged the hero to be careful with the money, since he had only just been given permission to manage the clan's treasury. But ignoring his mentor's wise advice, the young strategist calmly raised the bet to an astonishing 10 billion. The host was genuinely surprised by how quickly the price jumped, rising even faster than he had dared to expect. So the seasoned auctioneer began scanning the crowd carefully, looking for someone who could outbid that sky-high offer. The buyer of the magic book was clearly worried. Theoretically, he could have bid higher, but the gap set by this mysterious person was just too wide. Moreover, the observant mage noticed that the young man behaved and looked like a spoiled child from a noble family. What was astonishing was how easily the boy was willing to give away 10 billion. It was clear he was incredibly wealthy. Even knowing this, the rival couldn't back down. He absolutely had to get his hands on the snow tiger's carcass. Summoning all his courage, he raised the bet to 10.5 billion. This person's determination clearly impressed Yu Baek-jun, so without hesitation, he raised the price to a staggering 15 billion. The man was stunned by such boldness, but he desperately needed to raise the bet. So gritting his teeth, he said 15.5 billion. But before he could finish speaking, the player instantly and ruthlessly raised the price to 20 billion. Then the stunned man finally realized that someone who could so casually throw away 20 billion must be insanely rich. Of course, the snow tiger was incredibly valuable, but even for such an artifact, the price seemed outrageously high. The confused opponent no longer knew what to do, and the host has already started the ceremonial countdown from 5 to 1. And just like that, the auction has ended as there were no more lots left. But the organizers have, of course, prepared plenty of other elegant entertainment for the guests this evening. However, the player had already hurriedly left the hall, carefully folding the tiger into a small pouch. Han-sona was amazed at how such a massive carcass fit into such a tiny space, but it was a magical object of incredible power. As soon as they got the tiger's body, the player generously decided to give it to his mentor. On the way, he casually started a conversation, asking if his teacher knew what the laggers were. And when he saw her confusion, he smoothly shifted the topic to the legendary Magic Tower. As everyone in their world knew, this was the most powerful mage association in the entire known world, rivaling the strength of the Holy Sword Clan. Gaining admission to the Magic Tower is incredibly tough because the standards for students are extremely high. When it comes to training intensity, these sessions can easily match the tough workouts of the Holy Sword Clan. That's why many losers who didn't make the tough cut started their own group called the Left Behind. These are former students of the Magic Tower, the only place where ordinary people can learn the art of magic. Ordinary people dismiss their group as mere mercenaries, but Yu Baek-jun strongly disagreed with that view. It would be more accurate to call these people an outright criminal organization. They literally lose their minds whenever they see anything even remotely connected to magic. Right now, that very sinister group has gathered right in front of them. At the front stood the same man from the auction who, realizing the hero was holding a pouch with a snow tiger's body, boldly demanded he hand it over immediately. The other villains just laughed at Yu Baek-jun, who looked like an ordinary rich kid, and confidently decided to quickly take down this weakling to avoid any trouble with the authorities. To avoid drawing unwanted attention from passers-by, the mages cast a silence spell around them, allowing them to act without fear of being caught. For a while, Han-sona stood frozen, unable to believe the sheer audacity of what was happening. But soon, anger took over the girl, and she boldly asked the attackers if they even realized who they were dealing with. The leader just snorted dismissively, saying Yu Baek-jun was nothing more than a spoiled rich kid. Then he ruthlessly ordered his men to capture those brats alive for questioning. The bandits immediately launched a fierce attack on the young man using their glowing magical circles. However, the player effortlessly cast the newly learned spell, Counter-Strike. He skillfully absorbed every single attack coming his way. Instead of panicking, the frantic mages attacked with even more desperate intensity, while the player patiently absorbed all that destructive magic. Then he suddenly vanished from where he had just stood, using lightning-fast phantom steps. He crossed the distance in an instant, leaving behind a shimmering, ghostly double. The young warrior unleashed all his gathered mana on the stunned hunters. Their feet instantly froze and stuck to the ground, leaving the criminals completely unable to move. The other bandits looked around in panic at their leader. After all, he had promised dealing with the boy would be easy, and there was nothing to worry about. Even the boss was desperately panicking, realizing that everything had gone completely wrong and shattered his cunning plan. He had never seen such a skill before. It seemed like they didn't stand a chance of winning. So the cunning villain asked the guys to hold on a little longer while he pretended to call for backup from the base. However, it was clear that this was just a desperate attempt to flee the battlefield as quickly as possible. Watching this shameful escape, the player immediately realized that this man was one of the organization's leaders, so he turned to his mentor for help dealing with the minor troublemakers he had temporarily frozen. As soon as the young warrior received the approving nod, he vanished from his spot immediately. Hansone found it hard to believe that the player was so skilled with a technique he had only just learned. He truly acted like a top-level professional. Of course, the girl already knew her student was a genuine genius, no exaggeration. It seemed amazing that until that moment no one had recognized his incredible genius. Besides, she had never heard of the organization, the Left Behind, before. Yu Baekjun truly had extensive knowledge about this mysterious world. At that moment, the remaining mages kept attacking desperately, with no chance to escape the icy trap. No matter how desperately they tried, all their spells were ruthlessly cut down by the blade of Hansona, calmly approaching them. Seeing that flawless sword technique, one of the mages instantly realized with horror they were dealing with members of the Holy Sword clan. Before the villain could finish his warning, his head was neatly severed from his shoulders. Hansona calmly explained to the others that there are people in this world they should never, under any circumstances, get involved with. She believed that their outrageous stupidity deserved to be paid for with their own heads. Meanwhile, the fugitive kept running away in disgrace, even losing his precious magic book along the way. The player, of course, couldn't resist picking it up. Such a find could prove incredibly useful down the road. Then the young strategist calmly glanced back at the building where the clearly frightened coward had run. As experienced players know, the location of the stragglers' base changed in every chapter, so chasing them was the only reliable way to find their hideout. Of course, it would be much easier if there was just one base for the whole city, but now that he's found their hideout, the number of shelters doesn't matter anymore. After a brief pause, the player ordered his pursuers to reveal themselves. Right behind him, 3 figures appeared out of nowhere, just in time, as always. Among them, as expected, was the manager of the Soul Branch, who politely asked why the young gentleman had called them. Yu Baekjun calmly decided to find out if anyone had entered the specified building, and whether there were any civilians inside. However, the experienced manager confidently replied that he didn't sense any innocent people there. For this reason, the player immediately ordered everyone in the building to be eliminated, except for the man who had just escaped. And immediately, all 3 scattered in different directions, flawlessly following his command. Of course, Yu Baekjun was curious why the manager acted as if the young master himself had called him, even though the subordinates had been nearby since his arrival in Seoul. The young man was completely sure of this because, according to the original plan, he was supposed to be only with Hansona. But the clan leadership clearly contacted their branch and ordered them to secretly escort the heir. The hero's journey definitely had its clear advantage. Despite the extreme difficulty of the trials, he held nearly absolute power, which he couldn't help but enjoy. This is how he successfully completed the pest extermination mission, bought the necessary items at the auction, and earned 200 valuable experience points. Soon, all the criminals except that one scoundrel were ruthlessly killed, leaving the leader as the sole survivor, though seriously wounded. Looking at his ruthless enemies, he desperately wanted to know who they were and why they attacked his people. Yu Baekjun was genuinely surprised to hear such a bold question. So, walking up calmly, he politely introduced himself as a member of the renowned Holy Sword clan. Hearing this, the man couldn't hold back and burst out laughing right in the hero's face, thinking it was a bad joke. He just couldn't understand why members of the greatest clan were here. They were supposed to be peacefully sitting in their mountain strongholds. But before the scoundrel could finish speaking, he was hit hard right in the jaw. In the end, he lost several teeth and screamed in unbearable pain. The manager calmly grabbed him by the throat and warned that the man needed to show much more respect when speaking to the young gentleman, because next time, it wouldn't just be a broken nose. By this time, the manager's team had already taken care of all the other gang members. This pitiful man was the last survivor, so Yu Baekjun ordered him to be tied up before they headed down to the 3rd basement level to search the area. Obviously, the manager was puzzled by the order, since they had already inspected the place and found nothing unusual. However, following the young master's wishes, the servants went downstairs and found nothing more than an ordinary library. But besides the book storage, there was a secret hidden space. Besides, it was packed to the brim with incredibly rare magical artifacts of unimaginable value. Of course, the embarrassed manager quickly apologized sincerely to the young gentleman for not thoroughly inspecting the room during the first search. But Yubek-jun knew perfectly well that his team wouldn't have found the hidden space without outside help. Still, the manager was eager to find out how the young gentleman had learned about this secret place. The seasoned manager even suspected that the heir had secretly planted a spy from the lagging behind group within the organization, as the young man had changed so drastically from his former self. At this fateful moment, the player finally found what they had been searching for so long and so hard: a magical training circle. This rare relic was used by magical clans from parallel worlds to master their control over mana. Using an ancient artifact, the user gained the ability to channel much more energy while inside the sacred circle. Of course, the effect was relatively mild for such a high rank, but many people could use it at the same time, making it perfect for group training sessions. After making sure he could put the treasure to good use, the player also asked the manager to deliver everything from the secret room to the clan's ancestral estate. The situation with the captured mercenary was especially tricky. He definitely had to be taken alive. The people from the Magic Tower will soon pay them an official visit, and the fact that the clan's representatives have captured one of their former students will be a strong bargaining chip in the negotiations. Then the sharp manager realized the real reason the player ordered not to kill that scoundrel. The young master had carefully planned every detail of their delicate ties with the Magic Tower. Knowing that since this guy belonged to the Fallen, the powerful organization was actively hunting down defectors. It's unlikely the prisoner can offer the tower valuable information, but handing him over already means a lot for diplomatic relations. The manager was genuinely surprised that the young gentleman had thoroughly studied even the finer details of their dealings with the Magic Tower. He was nothing like the weakling the rumors had described. If the heir had stayed the same as before, the clan leaders probably wouldn't have even bothered to inform the branch of his presence, which means he's already been recognized as the potential successor within the family stronghold. After all those thrilling adventures, the player returned to the cozy comfort of home. After a good rest following a tense evening, he invited Kansonu to his chambers. The girl was clearly puzzled when she entered his room and found a complete rearrangement. All the books that used to stand neatly on the shelves were now gathering dust in the far corner. It turned out that since the player had read every single manuscript, he decided to get rid of them as they were no longer needed. But most importantly, the young man solemnly handed the amazed woman the magical book from the auction. He thought the ancient tome had caught her interest, so the wise strategist decided to save this exquisite gift for his mentor. Naturally, Hansona, stammering with embarrassment, tried to explain that she didn't deserve something so precious and rare. However, Yubek-jun calmly explained that only a woman with a specific type of mana could use this book, so the priceless manuscript was completely useless to him anyway. Clearly, the sharp young man knew that the stubborn woman would still try to refuse the generous gift. So, the player calmly noticed that she couldn't even hide her genuine awe just from a glance at the ancient tome. So there was no point pretending she didn't need that book, and if the mentor rejected her, he would just mercilessly burn it. In the end, unwilling to let such a priceless discovery be destroyed, the moved woman gratefully accepted the gift. Now that he had her full and unwavering support, it was time to ask the most important question. The player pulled out a mysterious bundle and honestly admitted they had no idea how to use this strange thing. He actually knew the activation details but wanted to rely entirely on the experienced Hansona's help. The girl immediately recognized that he was holding a magical training circle. The young man lied innocently, saying he took the artifact from the outcast's base, but there were no instructions included with the relic. So, the intrigued woman patiently explained that it wasn't a skill book, but more like a consumable artifact, and she could definitely equip it for the hero. Installing a scroll like this turned out to be a pretty straightforward process. First, you had to draw the circle where you planned to use it, then infuse the runes with a bit of your own mana. And then the perfect magic circle appeared right in the middle of his spacious room. Of course, the player showed genuine excitement at the miracle unfolding, even though he actually knew exactly what was happening. It was just that activating it used too much precious mana, and he couldn't afford such a luxury before. Even for the talented Hansona, such a heavy hit to her energy reserves was quite noticeable, but the exhausted mentor explained with satisfaction that once the circle is set up, the hero can use it repeatedly without extra effort. The player also reminded that, as mentioned before, this is a magical circle for mana training support, and he fully allows the mentor to use it anytime he's busy with other matters. Then they decided to test the marvelous artifact right away, putting its amazing powers to the test. At that moment, Choi Sung-min entered the room, surprised that the gentleman had decided to make a major rearrangement in his private office. The loyal servant arrived with important news. Tomorrow, high-ranking guests from the Magic Tower will be arriving. Of course, the player expected the meeting to happen a bit earlier than planned, but he was sure the tower's representatives would come to investigate the mysterious incident with the magical teleportation circle in the city. Moreover, Choi Sung-min, somewhat confused, explained that the delegation would include the young gentleman's former fiancée. Yoo Baek-jun nodded calmly at first, thoughtfully processing the information he had received. Then he suddenly froze, because he had never remembered anything like that before. In this tense moment, Choi Seung-min calmly began to nostalgically wonder how young Miss Jin So-yeon was doing. The player instantly recalled one of the game's most tragic moments involving this girl. When blinded by revenge, she completely lost her mind. The badly wounded player begged the mad sorceress to calm down, knowing her destructive actions wouldn't make anything better. However, the obsessed girl still craved bloody revenge and was completely indifferent to the disastrous consequences. In the end, she recklessly attacked the city, destroying several neighborhoods at once. This was another failure for the hero in the game, forcing him to start the entire scenario all over again. Jin So-yeon, along with the mysterious Han Chan-woo, was the main protagonist of this complex game and the next leader of the powerful Magic Tower. She was simply overpowered, born with incredible S&A class stats. If the disastrous reaction of the Magic Tower during the second major incident isn't stopped, the girl will go into berserk mode. In short, she will completely lose her mind and the world will tremble. Jin So-yeon was so powerful she could wipe all of Korea off the map alone. Yoo Baek-jun just couldn't believe that this living disaster was his ex-fiancée. The settings changed drastically and randomly with each new playthrough, closely tied to the choice system. And although he had played as Yoo Baek-jun many times before, the nuances of the hidden settings still remained a mystery to him. Perhaps beyond these obvious changes, there were some hidden mechanics in the game world. If this were just a regular game where death didn't matter, he'd simply die and try to find a new way to win. But this became his harsh reality. If he dies here, it will be for real and forever. The young man finally realized he had become the game character Yoo Baek-jun when his fencing instructor started chasing after him. Since it was exactly the same situation as in the game, his survival, overcoming a deadly trial just like he did in the virtual world, served as undeniable proof. For some unknown reason, there were still settings and events he had no idea about, possibly created when he was reborn in this body. And if that was true, he had no clue how it all happened or what lay ahead. Hiding his confusion from his companions, the player asked exactly what time the representatives from the Magic Tower would arrive tomorrow. When he learned it would happen early in the morning, he asked everyone to leave so they could get a good rest before the important meeting. The player was left alone in his room. When everyone fell asleep, he sat down in the center of the magic circle. Using the Skybreaker technique combined with deep meditation, the guy decided to carefully tackle everything step by step. The first thing he realized was that there were unpredictable variables. In addition to his unexpected relationship with Jin So-yeon, there may be other events he knows nothing about. Second, he didn't have any reliable information to base his decisions on. Third, he still didn't know exactly how he became Yoo Baek-jun, whether he could ever go back, or what had happened to his real body in the real world. One thing was absolutely certain. There was a real chance he could return to his own body after successfully completing the game as Yoo Baek-jun. So all he needs right now is to survive at any cost and just see how it all ends. At the very least, it was the best course of action he could take given the circumstances. But to survive in this harsh world, he desperately needed reliable information about what was coming. Early in the morning, the eldest heir gathered with her assistants to welcome the distinguished guests. As we know, the father went down to the underground training center dungeon for his own practice. The assistant was asked to stay as per the meeting protocol, but he chose not to meet the guests in person and instead ordered the delegation to be received according to the heir's wishes. According to the intelligence received, Jin So-yeon herself was also expected to pay them an official visit. Of course, the girl was very curious about what Mistress Jin So-yeon had found so interesting in their remote mountain area near Sarak Peak. No matter how much she thought about it, she couldn't understand why the powerful heiress of the Magic Tower chose this very place for her journey. Soon, the player himself joined the elder sister and her entourage. The young man was clearly surprised that the girl had arrived so early just to greet the important guests. First, the sharp-witted heiress noticed Mrs. Han's son, and immediately realized that she had now become Yoo Baek-jun's personal mentor. This only made the older sister smile ironically, since when she herself asked the talented girl to study with her, Han Sona flatly refused, saying she had no intention of following any of the throne contenders. Clearly embarrassed by the awkward situation, Han Sona immediately felt uncomfortable having to explain her unexpected choice to someone once again. However, Yoo Baek-jun unexpectedly defended the embarrassed mentor, gently reminding his sister that people's opinions tend to change drastically over time. He also smiled slightly, and suggested that maybe Han Sona just liked him a lot more than his older sister ever did. Of course, the heiress was genuinely shocked by how boldly her younger brother dared to speak to her. Although everyone tensed up at his provocative words, the player remained completely calm and unshaken. Then the wise sister realized that now was definitely not the time for family arguments or airing grievances. At this momentous instant, the teleportation circle finally activated, glowing with a mystical light. The player knew there was no reason for him to be nervous. He just needs to do everything exactly as it happened in the game. As soon as the mysterious girl appeared in the center of the magic circle, she gracefully announced that the long-awaited inspection had arrived. Then she politely greeted the people who had come to meet her. First of all, Jin So-yeon focused her full attention on Yu Jang-yeon. They hadn't seen each other in ages, since that prestigious conference last year. The heiress of the Magic Tower was genuinely happy to see Yu Jang-en looking healthy and thriving. Yu Jang-en simply smiled mysteriously and kindly remarked that Jin So-en looks more beautiful and charming with each passing year. After exchanging pleasantries, Jin So-yeon finally turned to the other person who had come to meet her. The mysterious young man she truly hadn't seen in a very, very long time. Yu Baek-jun approached her confidently and calmly greeted his ex-fiancé. However, the girl was genuinely surprised, since when did Yu Baek-jun start speaking to her so casually, like they were close friends? Obviously, the player immediately realized they had made a serious mistake in their approach. He quickly tried to make amends by calling her sis, but that only seemed to annoy her even more. In the end, the young man realized he was in a very uncomfortable situation. Not long ago, he was talking with his mentor Han Sona about the upcoming visit of Jin So-yeon. As far as the girl remembered, the two got along really well, and it seemed like Yu Baek-jun even liked the mysterious sorceress. They didn't break up because of a fight or conflict. Instead, the head of the family made a one-sided decision to call off the engagement. Han Sona was naturally surprised by her protégé's strange behavior, and gently suggested he might have had a brief memory lapse, so the wise mentor advised him to see a doctor to get it checked out. Right now, after the teacher's awkward words, the player was completely confused about why the situation had become so uncomfortable. But since Yu Baek-jun didn't know the best way to handle it, he decided to act on his own. Wanting to change the subject, the young man asked about Jin So-yeon's real purpose for visiting, since he knew she needed to find or check something in the area. The girl gracefully showed off her mesmerizing ice magic skill, skillfully forming a delicate snowflake in her palm and sending it to dance through the air. The sorceress calmly explained that she wanted to test her newly gained power here, as these extremely cold and remote mountain areas were perfect for such experiments. Yu Baek-jun immediately guessed that the girl would need an experienced guide to lead her to the coldest and most remote part of these mountains. So without hesitation, he asked who would be accompanying the lady on her dangerous journey. However, Yu Jang-en quickly reminded us with regret that she simply doesn't have time for such expeditions. In a pinch, she could send one of her servants, but they were unlikely to handle such an important task. So Yu Baek-jun boldly offered himself as the guide. Of course, Yu Jang-eun skeptically pointed out that the young man knew very little about the dangers of this formidable mountain. However, he confidently mentioned that he loves reading ancient texts and knows of a remote place where the cold is truly bone-chilling. Everyone present was pleased that the problem was solved so smoothly. While the younger brother takes care of the fussy Jin So-yeon, the older sister can focus calmly on her important tasks. After receiving the kind approval of the eldest heiress, the player also asked for her permission to bring everything needed to accompany the young lady of the Magic Tower on her expedition. Obviously, impatient Jin So-yeon hoped they would set off right after she arrived. However, Yu Baek-jun just smiled mysteriously, saying he wanted to show her something else interesting first. This is how they reached the dark walls of the Holy Sword Clan's dungeon. All this time, a tied-up member of the criminal gang, the Left Behind, was sitting here. Jin So-yeon was pleasantly surprised to find the very lost one they had been searching for so tirelessly across the country. The sorceress sincerely thanked Yu Baek-jun for his invaluable help, promising that the Magic Tower would get all the information it needed about that villain. Clearly terrified, the man immediately began pleading desperately for mercy. He would rather die quickly than endure the cruel tortures of the Magic Tower's dungeons. But of course, no one came to his aid. In the end, because they needed to question the prisoner, they decided to set off on the dangerous journey the next morning, since starting the climb at night would only make the path harder and more dangerous. And a day or two didn't really matter. However, despite these reasonable excuses, the real reason for the delay was that Yu Baek-jun urgently needed to properly prepare for the upcoming challenges. He also decided to complete an important mission called the Cunning Ice Ghosts, while on top of Mount Sarek, using the excuse of helping Jin So-yeon with her training. These mystical creatures needed to see a special mark on him to recognize him as an ally. The ghost itself wasn't extraordinary, but it was essential for successfully completing the crucial event called Tears of the Snowfield. Among the many events happening in this dangerous world, some can lead to disaster if they aren't stopped in time. A perfect example is Tears of the Snowfield. If we don't deal with the evil spirit of the Ice Tiger now, it will come down from the snowy peaks, reclaim its ancient body, and mercilessly destroy several nearby towns. Of course, it would be great to learn different skills and techniques to make fighting the monster easier, but the hero simply didn't have enough experience points to buy the needed abilities. If he successfully completes the Tears of the Snowfield event, he'll at least be able to level up his legendary God of War book. In the hero's journey, there's a special system called Trial Quests, and if the player has the Book of the God of War, it adds an achievement system that generously rewards points for every completed achievement. Once Yu Baek-jun unlocks the necessary achievements, earning valuable points will become much easier. But first, he needs to improve his mastery of the sacred Book of the God of War. After sorting out all the details of the upcoming challenges, a worn-out Yu Baek-jun collapsed onto the bed, imagining everything he still had to accomplish. At last, the morning of the long-awaited expedition arrived, and he met the young lady of the magic tower at the estate's entrance. Despite her powerful ice magic and warm clothes, the girl still felt cold even in the relatively safe grounds of the estate. However, there was no longer any reason to delay their risky journey, so they had to set off immediately. Jin So-yeon was clearly surprised by how many things and supplies the player decided to bring along. But Yu Baek-jun mysteriously chose not to reveal what he had saved for her. She would understand everything once they reached their destination. And so, this unlikely pair set off on a daring journey to the coldest spot atop the snowy mountain. Already on her way up, Jin So-yeon realized the mission would be much tougher than she first thought. Even the fierce blizzard was stronger than she expected, though it was perfect for boosting her magical power. Yet in that swirling snow and icy wind, she could barely see a thing ahead. Besides, at such a slow pace, it would be really hard to protect the defenseless Yu Baek-jun if hungry monsters suddenly appeared. The sorceress warned that in this snowy haze, nothing is visible, so they should stay close together for safety. But at that very moment, she watched in horror as fierce snow wolves suddenly pounced on the young man from their hidden trap. But in an instant, he swiftly grabbed the predators by their snouts and, with a powerful strike, shattered them into shards of solid ice. Then the player, as if nothing had happened, apologized for not hearing Jin So-yeon's words clearly because of the howling wind. With a polite smile, he asked her to repeat what she had said. Clearly, the girl was deeply impressed. She expected Yu Baek-jun to need protection from the monsters, but he handled it all on his own. However, the sorceress knew this was far from the end of the deadly dangers ahead. In this tense moment, other monsters were already sneaking up behind them, drawn by the tempting scent of human flesh. Then Jin So-yeon swiftly struck one of them with a powerful blast of ice magic, piercing his cold heart. Then the talented sorceress methodically struck down several more monsters standing behind the unfortunate adventurer, one by one. But even this show of strength wasn't enough to destroy them all. The surviving creatures grew even angrier and launched a desperate attack on the bold sorceress. But the girl quickly and skillfully cast intricate magical circles that sparkled above her head. She unleashed powerful fiery rings that mercilessly struck all nearby enemies. Yu Baek-jun was genuinely amazed by her incredible magical power. He had even forgotten that from the very start of the game, this girl was so powerful. Of course, the young man knew she was basically a cheat character, but he didn't expect such massive destruction. However, the experienced player knew that such a huge surge of magical power wasn't always appropriate in the mountains. Looking around nervously, he realized that such powerful magic had drawn the attention of many other monsters nearby. There were quite a few enemies here, including some who had already attacked the travelers. For this reason, the player boldly plunged into the fierce battle, methodically taking down the wolves that dared to attack the young lady of the magic tower. By this point, the guy noticed that along with the regular wolves, their fierce leader had appeared too, which only annoyed him more. However, the young man promised Jin So-yeon he would take care of the pesky wolves while she dealt with the bigger monsters. Obviously, the girl doubted that Yu Baek-jun could pull it off, since there were quite a few opponents. But she couldn't help him because the monsters kept attacking her fiercely. In just a couple of minutes, the player skillfully took down all the wolves, including their powerful leader. Then he looked back at Jin So-yeon with satisfaction, who by that time had also finished her impressive battle. And just as he expected from his memories of the game, she created a true icy hell for the monsters. But together they managed to overcome all their opponents, so they all agreed to take a short break. For this reason, the kind gentleman handed the young woman a small bottle filled with a liquid that looked like plain water at first glance. The young man knew well that even for the powerful Jin So-yeon, using so much destructive magic would inevitably cause serious exhaustion. But if she drank this healing elixir, she could quickly restore her magical power and energy. With genuine surprise at such unexpected kindness, the sorceress realized that Yu Baek-jun had truly changed a lot since they last met. Obviously, the young man was a bit startled, thinking he had somehow made a serious mistake in his behavior. Jin So-yeon calmly explained to the young man that he had always followed her like a shadow, gently calling her little sister, but now he had become too bold. The girl liked that the warrior had stood the test of time and had even started showing care for her. The heiress of the magical tower recalled how, in earlier days when they were younger, they rarely shared their personal struggles with each other. Yu Baekjun cried bitterly, feeling he had let his father down, and indeed, the young man realized that the structure of the magic tower closely resembled the Holy Sword clan, but with one crucial difference. The position of successor is open to everyone equally. In other words, the seat of the next head of the magical tower is available to anyone who wishes to take it. The daughter of the current ruler of the magical tower likely felt immense pressure from her parent, which is why the swordsman sensed their similarity. However, the heir of the Holy Sword clan wasn't sure what exactly they were hiding, so continuing the conversation on such a delicate topic seemed risky. The young man decided to change the subject by asking where they were headed next. If it's time for a short break, there's no need to waste precious moments. Travelers are almost at their destination and will arrive soon. After saying this, the warrior decided to move forward, leading his companion along with him. Watching the hero, the sorceress recalled the words of the Holy Sword clan leader, who had sent his offspring to the magic tower for a test. However, the patriarch discovered that his youngest son had absolutely no talent. Seeing what the heir had done to the wolf pack, the sorceress clearly couldn't believe such claims. Soon the guide led the girl to her destination. It struck her. There was absolutely nothing around the travelers. But when the blizzard finally eased, the sorceress saw before her a shimmering ice monolith glowing with all the colors of the rainbow. It's clear that the hero's companion didn't understand what this mysterious ice cliff really was. So the girl immediately decided to test her suspicions, while Yu Baekjun had no idea how keenly her feelings were tuned. The heiress instantly cast her mastery of detection magic with perfect skill. She saw tiny creatures moving at the entrance of the icy cave. She guessed they were monsters, but her companion quickly explained that wasn't the case at all. As the swordsman neared the cave entrance, the little ones sensed he was human and tried to chase him away, seeing him as a threat. Watching Yu Baekjun fearlessly approach those tiny creatures, Jin So-yeon stood frozen in amazement. The warrior explained that, in a way, these little ones could be considered fairies. Then the young man reached out to one of the creatures. An engraved mark appeared on his hand, and the ice spirits accepted him as a friend. At last, they stopped fearing the swordsman standing beside them. The player explained to his companion that these tiny beings are ice spirits who guide the souls of the dead to the afterlife. Then the warrior decided to ask the little ones what they had forgotten here. It turned out that their house was taken over by strange creatures, evil and terrifying killers. And now the spirits can't return to their world, leaving them in deep despair. Watching these tiny creatures, the sorceress knew that fairies existed in this very form. However, she felt that the ice spirits were different from the fairies she had known before. At that moment, the little ones admitted that all they could do was hide in the cave, as the spirits were supposed to send their friend to the afterlife. But since they couldn't, they suffered more with each passing day. The story was about an unfortunate snow tiger. They needed its body because all evil spirits are tied to their physical forms. They had to subdue and cleanse the snow predator, or else they couldn't help but find peace. To their great relief, the hero found the snow tiger's carcass right at hand. That's when the heir to the magic tower realized why she had such a strange feeling. Now she finally realized Yu Baekjun had been trying to use her to help those fairies. Of course, the swordsman tried to explain he never intended to use it. But the sorceress couldn't forgive him for hiding the snow predator's body in his pocket all this time. The young man promised that once they reached their destination, his companion would understand why he acted that way. So the travelers continued their journey with the little ice spirits. Soon they reached a point where the fairies could go no further. Danger lay ahead. But if the clan heir could tame the snow tiger, they would calm its spirit and send it to the afterlife. Seeing the little creatures worry, the player realized the situation was even worse than he had thought. So the swordsman looked at Jin So-yeon, signaling that he was counting on her help. The warrior calmly explained that there was no better place to gather magical power than here. And he was right. However, the situation still annoyed the sorceress quite a bit. But she understood why Yu Baekjun had brought her here. When the heiress heard the terrifying roar, chills ran down her spine. Perhaps some magical force was sending a cold shiver through her. There was simply no better place for meditation, so the girl decided to go there right away. But the young man asked her to wait a bit. They needed to prepare something first, since, as the sorceress had already realized, a direct confrontation was simply impossible, so they had to be as ready as possible. The alchemist made many elixirs, with some help from his teacher, while the warrior brewed potions using his own recipes. First, the player gave the heir of the magic tower an elixir she had used before in battles with monsters. But before taking it again, she needed to unroll a scroll that would come in handy. The girl stared in amazement at the vial before her. Her magical power had noticeably increased after just one dose of the elixir, and she had no idea how the young man had learned to brew a potion that sped up recovery. She used to think he had just gotten stronger in martial arts, but in reality, the warrior had grown in many ways. Soon, as they moved forward, the travelers heard a mighty roar, and then saw the spirit of the very snow tiger itself. Fortunately, the predator hasn't noticed them yet, or maybe it's just ignoring their presence. At that moment, the swordsman was setting up a magic circle to help restore and boost his power. This magical circle was called the Circle of Manifestation. It could also summon ghost-type monsters within range for 2 hours. The sorceress suspected that even setting aside the cost, this magic circle was probably very hard to obtain. However, the heir knew the effort to retrieve the scroll was worth it. If the snow tiger were alive, none of this would be necessary. But once the beast became an evil spirit, that was a whole different story. In any case, they needed to catch the predator, so the player got ready to use the scroll. As soon as the swordsman infused a bit of mana into it, the scroll's magic surged straight toward the massive body of the snow spirit. Finally, while he was still disoriented, they could try to tie him up and calm him down. So, the heiress of the magical tower immediately cast a binding chain spell on the monster. The chains dug into the monster's body, binding it tightly. It clearly troubled him, and the girl knew she couldn't hold out much longer. The enemy's magical power was overwhelming. Then the warrior began to focus his power while standing inside the magical circle of enhancement. The swordsman used another one of his techniques called Heaven's Demise. He unleashed his fiery power straight onto the monster, engulfing it in hellish flames. Despite everything, the tiger still stood firm on its strong paws, so the worried sorceress quickly warned the hero that the attack didn't seem to work. At that very moment, the evil spirit roared loudly and began thrashing wildly, tearing the chains into tiny pieces. First, the predator focused its attack on the nearby Baek-jun. Dodging the strike, the warrior realized that every attack from this creature was deadly. Even a slight touch from the snow tiger would surely mean the swordsman's death. But the heiress of his magic tower protected her companion by casting another spell, gravity above the tiger's head. In the end, the gravitational forces slammed the beast straight into the ground. He growled loudly with rage, trying to get back on his feet. But when he succeeded, instead of a roar, a bright shining white energy began to emerge in his mouth. The player immediately sensed the power of the incoming attack and struck the tiger with a storm blow. The enraged beast was about to swallow the warrior whole, but he suddenly vanished from its jaws. The young man was very lucky that the sorceress used teleportation magic just in time to save Baek-jun from deadly danger. After that, the travelers began to consider what to do next, since their enemy was recovering very quickly. Then the swordsman realized he had no choice but to try to strike the beast as hard as he could. So the alchemist lunged at the predator again, delivering a powerful strike using his attribute manifestation technique. One strike wasn't enough for such a huge and powerful beast, so the clan heir followed up with a double blow. Then the monster was immediately knocked back. At that moment, Jin So-yeon stepped into the fight, ready to unleash the Inferno spell. In the end, the wild, savage spirit's body slammed into the nearest wall with such force that it started cracking and looked like it could collapse at any moment. However, even after all that, the snow tiger was still undefeated. The warriors didn't know what to do next, but the player suggested they keep attacking the beast with the same fierce spirit. Though it may seem pointless now, the snow tiger is a spirit that guides the souls of icy creatures to the afterlife. Moreover, the predator can use its supernatural power in battle, absorbing nearby souls regardless of damage taken, instantly healing itself. That's why the swordsman suggested the heir to the magic tower take a closer look at the tiger. Although the travelers had already battered the monster badly, it still hadn't started healing itself. The predator was using souls only for defensive attacks. Now, the opponents were entering the second phase of the battle. The tiger's mighty roar summoned angry spirits. They immediately started climbing out from every corner, heading straight toward the hero and his companion. Of course, the sorceress never expected to encounter undead here, but Baek-jun explained that they were just spirits wandering around the mountain. This scene showed the second phase of the battle, when the tiger turns souls into demons that attack the living. At the start of his journey as a warrior, Baek-jun didn't know how to complete the ghost hunter's mission, which allowed the snow tiger, turned demon, to send all the souls away to reclaim its body. Because of this, the alchemist witnessed the disaster where monsters and hunters turned to dust, and thanks to that bitter experience, the clan heir now knew every way to fight the undead, so the swordsman wasn't scared at all by what was happening. At that very moment, Jin So-yeon immediately used the fire attribute, trying to attack the souls approaching the travelers. But there were too many demons. While some fell, others kept attacking relentlessly. Then the young man told the girl not to worry and to keep fighting back, because he had expected this and had already prepared something to help them. At this crucial moment, the hero held an ultra-powerful scroll of holy magic against the undead. As the undead closed in on the warriors, the alchemist infused the scroll with his mana. As a result, the magical artifact soared high into the sky, lighting everything around with a golden glow. In the end, all the undead vanished as if they had never existed. Even the heiress of the magical tower was stunned, her mouth agape, because the Sphere of Light was a precious scroll her father had personally given to the leader of the Holy Sword Clan, and the sorceress couldn't understand how Yu Baek-jun had managed to get it. The guy, smiling calmly, explained that no one gave him the scroll. He stole it himself. And clearly, the magician didn't even know how to respond to a confession like that. In this tense moment, even the snow tiger started shielding itself from the divine light. After all, it had become a demon and was now undead. Divine magic, like a sphere of light, is like deadly poison to the undead. Of course, the predator was still reeling from the powerful blow of holy magic, so Yu Baek-jun moved in to finish him off. In the end, the warrior's fiery fist engulfed the tiger completely in its flames. As the swordsman paused, the beast's body lying on the ground still burned with hellish flames. At this crucial moment, the familiar voices of the little ice spirits echoed behind the heroes. They hurried to finish what they started and finally free the tiger's soul from unbearable torment. As they drew near, the tiny creatures began an ancient cleansing ritual. For the ice spirits, being guides to the other world, knew best how to purify a fallen soul. The little ones, nearly in tears, gathered around their big friend to help him return to his home world. Soon, the tiger's body finally stopped burning, and he managed to open his eyes. Now the predator has become a translucent spirit, and its little friends asked it to return to the spirit world. The alchemist just smiled, glad that the striped giant had finally come to. The tiger clearly got angry, not understanding why these little humans were here. However, Yu Baek-jun calmly explained that they helped him right when the beast went mad. Then the warrior also showed the consequences of the predator's madness, clearly reflected in the cave's ruined state. Then the swordsman took out a small pouch, explaining that when the travelers arrived, the ice spirits had asked him for help. To help the little ones, the heroes also recovered the tiger's body, which they accidentally found at an auction. Only then did the predator finally realize it had been killed by human hands. Yu Baek-jun knew that such a big and powerful creature probably wouldn't fall easily to humans, so the tiger began to remember how it had died. It turned out that his baby had been captured by people who were as strong as Yu Baek-jun, all dressed in black armor. Though few in number, these people were incredibly strong, and the parent had no choice but to take extreme measures to get their child back. In the end, the great beast lost consciousness from severe wounds and barely remembered what happened next. But one thing was clear: he was killed. But the tiger was glad he saved the cub before it died, hoping the humans wouldn't find it after he hid it behind the icy wall. Then, Yu Baek-jun remembered that in the game's story, treasure hunters were after the snow tiger, and if he dealt with them now, it would only make the game harder, so the heir decided to leave them alone for the time being. Before heading into the spirit world, the snow tiger decided to ask the hero for a favor. The predator wanted the man to find and deal with the people who killed him, as the spirit had a personal grudge against those villains who attacked him. The beast saw them as too dangerous because they were the kind who would do anything for their own gain. Of course, Yu Baek-jun promised to find them and sort things out, knowing that the story would bring them together during a major event in the game. The tiger also wanted Yu Baek-jun to look after his little cub. The heir was definitely surprised, knowing he was just like the guys who killed the snow tiger, so he didn't understand why the beast trusted him. However, the predator could trust the person who brought its body here and even help the ice spirits. Although the player appreciated the trust, he wasn't sure he could protect the baby snow tiger, knowing his own strength was limited. And the predator sensed that too. So the great beast decided to help the young man by granting him the strength he needed in exchange for a favor. The swordsman was satisfied with the deal. So the tiger's power left its spiritual body and moved straight into the young man. Then this power entered the warrior's chest and spread throughout his entire body. The system immediately congratulated the hero for absorbing the energy the snow tiger had stored throughout its life, increasing his power by 1 level and granting the swordsman a new trait: Master of Cold. The power of cold-related skills has greatly increased while their magic energy consumption has decreased, and the warrior will no longer feel the cold as intensely, growing even stronger in frosty environments. Watching the player absorb magical energy, Jin So-yeon realized his power had truly grown significantly. At that very moment, the snow tiger realized his time had come. But the predator wasn't upset at all, because for those like him, who constantly move between the spirit world and the living world, death is just a minor thing. The giant turned back one last time to say goodbye to his little friends. Then the spirit began to fade, honestly admitting that it still couldn't get used to the constant goodbyes with comrades. Watching the fading silhouette, the swordsman realized the tiger had visited the spirit world more than once. The alchemist asked the beast to sit there for a while and wait. In return for the tiger's help, Yu Baek-jun wanted him to see that he would fulfill his request. And of course, the warrior promised to bring his little one back to life. Undoubtedly, the predator knew he had given the man a tough task, but the hero's confidence brought him a sense of relief. So, as he disappeared, the giant promised to wait and watch how Yu Baek-jun would handle the task. As soon as the tiger vanished, the ice spirits realized the man was about to enter the spirit world. Since he couldn't get there alive, the little ones decided to make him a gift. In the end, the alchemist gained a new blessing called the Invitation to the Spirit World, allowing him to freely enter and exit the spirit realm, easily earn the trust of its inhabitants, and face lighter penalties for a living person entering that world. Of course, Yu Baek-jun understood that while the reward seemed like a useless skill now, it would definitely come in handy later on his journey. After the warrior received his award, the little ones decided to journey to the spirit world to bid farewell to the snow tiger on its final journey. At last, their mission was nearly complete. Now the most important thing left is to free the little snow tiger that his father hid here. As soon as the player removed the icy barrier, he immediately saw that the child was badly injured. His wounds were deep, and though the cub looked bad, he was still alive. So, Yu Baek-jun decided to treat him as soon as possible before it was too late. The alchemist immediately grabbed the potion, hoping to heal the tiger cub just like he did in the game. The problem was that wounds heal much slower in real life than in the game, but the swordsman hoped the treatment would help. First, the warrior treated the wounds, focusing on the deepest parts, then gave the little one medicine to kickstart the healing process throughout the body. Seeing the potion Yu Baek-jun used to heal the baby, Jin So-yeon realized it was a pretty high-quality remedy. It turned out his heir had made one too, just in case he got seriously injured, and given the ingredients used, the elixir was highly effective. Since the sorceress was still curious about who would dare attack such a small and cute cub, the player explained that those who attacked the snow tiger were treasure hunters. They searched ruins and dungeons worldwide, looted graves and hunted spirit animals, and soon these villains will spark another major incident that triggers the game's first global event. The saddest part for the guy was that it was better to let them cause trouble for a while, because if Yu Baek-jun stopped them, things could take an unpredictable turn. Now that the travelers have finally finished their urgent tasks, the heiress of the magic tower grew curious about when they would turn their attention to her own needs. However, the swordsman calmly explained that as long as the snow tiger lived in this enchanted place, pure ice magic had gathered here, a piercing cold that seemed to chill you to the bone. Of course, Jin So-yeon could feel the raging magical power, but the catch was that someone had to guard her while she was vulnerable in meditation. And since Yu Baek-jun forced the sorceress to cooperate, he was bound to pay the price by becoming her relentless guardian. The young man instantly understood the girl's true intentions. She wanted him to take on the role of protector, and as a warrior, he was capable of guarding the mage while also caring for the tiny tiger cub. However, the heiress had completely stopped listening to his words, instead watching the little creature with a fond smile as it playfully stuck out its pink tongue. Seeing the heroine's confused expression, the swordsman bitterly realized she was completely ignoring his words. In the end, the pair decided to venture deep into the mysterious cave. The sorceress honestly admitted she was a bit worried about possible monsters, but felt relieved knowing a reliable protector was there. After that, the sorceress promised to complete the ritual in 3 days and counted on the hero's full support to repay the debt she owed. Just as the Holy Sword clan has a legendary mind technique that soars to the skies, the sorcerers had their own unique ways to build up magical power. These sacred techniques were known as the art of magical breathing. There was a good reason the elders chose Jin So-yeon as their successor at such a young age. It turned out that the girl had an exceptionally advanced mastery of the magical breathing technique. Watching the multiple layers of mana swirling around the meditating heiress, the player realized that such a powerful person could truly be trusted. Anyway, while his companion sank into deep meditation, the swordsman decided to explore the mysteries of his own system. Right now, his magical power has increased by a whole level, and his other abilities have improved noticeably. If this trend continues, the warrior will reach a rating between B+ and A before his older brother returns. Of course, dwelling on Yu-taeran's achievements was pointless. The alchemist still had much to strive for, as the game's storyline was all about rapidly gaining power, especially from the middle part onward. Soon, S-rank monsters will start to appear, and his current abilities clearly won't be enough to face such threats. But the little tiger cub the player cared for will prove to be an invaluable ally in the challenges ahead. Finally, the warrior decided to take a break and think over his next moves, after such an eventful and intense day. But first, the alchemist had to deal with a few more dark souls lurking in this cursed place. 10 minutes after defeating all the evil spirits, the player leaned against the cold wall and started to doze off. All 3 days passed this way, until finally, the heir of the magical tower emerged from deep meditation. The warrior was amazed. The girl had truly completed her spiritual practice in the promised 3 days. However, the swordsman expected the process to take much longer, as the cave was filled with an immense amount of raw energy. Thanks to Yu Baek-jun's relentless protection, the sorceress was able to focus entirely on absorbing magical energy. Looking around, the girl realized that while she was away, Her companion had done a great job protecting her as she meditated. The player just laughed at the modest compliment and then decided to check on the heiress's well-being. And indeed, the sorceress felt thoroughly refreshed after her long, exhausting journey. Yu Baekjun clearly understood that although the girl responded with her usual calm, absorbing such immense magical power had surely made her already incredible abilities even more impressive. At that moment, the little tiger cub, finally healed from its severe wounds, began to slowly wake up and regain consciousness. Jin So-yeon leaned in toward the tiny creature, hoping the little one was feeling much better now. Hearing the enchanting voice of the sorceress, the little one immediately opened his amber eyes. Then he instantly jumped from the hero's arms and dashed off into the winding cave. The heiress of the magical tower immediately got scared, thinking she had frightened the little one by coming too close. But the next moment, the tiger cub began to meow plaintively, gazing sadly at the icy walls around him. Jin So-yeon had no idea what to do in this situation, but the swordsman suspected the little creature might have sensed something. This is where cruel people caught and killed a great snow tiger. So Yu Baekjun quickly explained to the little one that his mighty parent had passed into the spirit world and, leaving this world behind, entrusted the child to the hero's care. The tiny tiger immediately let out a piercing scream and growled fiercely in deep sorrow. However, the alchemist calmly reassured the distressed little creature, explaining that he knew where the villains were and would help the child reunite with its parent in the afterlife. So the warrior suggested the tiger cub trust him and stay close for a while. In the end, the little one had no choice but to cry sadly, burying its face in its paws. After that, the little creature rushed into Yu Baekjun's arms, its only remaining protector, and burst into bitter tears. Such a reaction was quite predictable, as the baby's entire family was killed by ruthless murderers. But Jin So-yeon struggled to understand these emotional responses. It's simply not a problem for the families of the Holy Sword and the Magic Tower to kill all their brothers and sisters, to gain absolute power in the fight for the throne. In these powerful households, family ties mean absolutely nothing. It's no wonder the heiress didn't understand Yu Baekjun's inner struggles or the tiny creature's deep sorrow. So the alchemist had to patiently explain to the sorceress that for ordinary beings, the death of loved ones truly brings unbearable sorrow. Soon, the three travelers returned to the safe walls of the clan of the Holy Sword. The loyal helpers and mentor were genuinely happy to see the young master return. They eagerly awaited him, relieved and happy that the heir was safe and unharmed. However, when the servants noticed the warrior's jacket puffing up, they were surprised. How did the young master gain so much weight so quickly? The swordsman calmly explained that his rounded belly was only temporary. Then the player showed a small tiger cub that snuggled trustingly against his chest. In this touching moment, Han Sona's heart was completely won over by the little creature's charm. While Choi Sung-min feared the young master was about to take up dangerous poaching, the servant knew that snow tigers were rarely seen in the wild, but he believed poaching was utterly unworthy of the heir's noble status. Yu Baekjun was clearly fed up with hearing such nonsense. His head was already spinning from exhaustion, and the warrior just longed for a proper rest. So, returning to his quarters, the alchemist, true to his passionate love for animals, began pondering the tiger cub's future, while even Jin So-yeon chose to stay 3 more days with the hospitable clan instead of heading straight back to the magic tower. No matter how hard he tried, the hero just couldn't get a good night's sleep. The swordsman completely forgot that snow tigers are strictly nocturnal and become especially active after dark, and he also gave the tiny creature a fitting name, Snow Shadow. After receiving proper treatment, the little one started feeling much better. As expected from a spiritual being, the cub understood everything Yu Baekjun said, but the little tiger had no desire to follow his guardian's advice. In another sleepless moment, the tired guy noticed the little animal staring at him with a playful, intense gaze. Then the rascal lunged and struck the swordsman sharply in the face with his claw. The player bitterly realized there was no difference between a mystical spirit and an ordinary house cat. They caused the same kind of trouble. At the worst possible moment, the warrior suddenly got a call from Choi Seung-min, who had just found the person Yu Baekjun had mentioned. The wanted person lived roughly in the area the player pointed to. So, after thanking his loyal servant, the alchemist promised to arrive at the designated place soon. So the swordsman found himself in the hilly district of Busan. At this tense moment, the bold bandits kept knocking insistently on the door, which no one was willing to open peacefully. So the thugs had to break down the door to storm into their unlucky debtor's home. A frightened young man timidly reminded the wrongdoers that it's illegal to collect debts, intimidate, or threaten defenseless people. However, the bandits coldly reminded him that brute force is stronger than any law. And besides, the young man had no right to complain after taking the money and running away cowardly. Of course, the boy desperately tried to explain that he never took the cursed money. It was borrowed by his late father, but the father cunningly used his son's name to secure a hefty loan. Moreover, the loan sharks lent such an astronomical amount only because the guy's family were hunters, considered fairly well off. But if the debtors just wasted all the money thoughtlessly, they're in for a tough time. So the extortionist demanded that the boy immediately go to the dangerous gates and pay them back with hard, bloody work. A frightened hunter plaintively reminded that he was low level and couldn't even enter the deadly gates. Plus, he never intended to work as a hunter in such a dangerous field. But right after those words, the unfortunate man was hit hard several times in the face. Then the thug continued to beat the debtor methodically, teaching this insolent fool a lesson. He only stopped when the boss behind him gave the order, and the leader calmly told the guy that this wasn't a problem to be solved with empty talk. If he can't pay up, he won't be much use, so the gangsters kindly point out the only way he can earn money. Obviously, the extortionists couldn't understand why the hereditary hunter refused to enter the profitable gates, but the young man simply didn't want to die as pointlessly as his father did. Then the boss calmly explained that you can get injured anywhere, not just at the gates, and the kid clearly isn't thinking straight if he says something like that. So the boss ordered his subordinate to give that arrogant guy a serious brain massage to finally make him see reason. But at that critical moment, the thug's hand was easily stopped by the intervention of Han-sona. Clearly everyone there was stunned by the sudden appearance of the mysterious woman, as no one heard a sound or sensed her coming. Then Baek-jun calmly reminded everyone that when visiting someone's home, guests should open and close doors properly, not barge in like wild animals. The hero was clearly struck by how completely these people lacked even the most basic manners. The bullies immediately demanded that the confident player leave at once, not realizing who they were really dealing with. However, Baek-jun calmly offered to pay off the debts of this unfortunate man, even though the gang leader was certain that no matter the hero's influence, the astronomical sum of 2.7 billion won was far beyond what he could easily repay. This number shocked the young man, as his late father had only borrowed a mere 500 million. The boss cynically reminded them that over all this endless time, the interest had piled up like robbery, and there was nothing he could do about it. Then the swordsman gave those brash guys two tempting options. First, they take back only what they originally borrowed and quietly disappear. Second, they get nothing at all and go find a good doctor. Of course, the alchemist would strongly advise them to choose the first, more sensible option. But the boss just sneered and flicked a cigarette butt at the hero, making it clear that thugs like them would never give up easy money. When someone borrows money, they must be ready to pay it back with interest. A timeless rule. But before the man could finish his greedy speech, Han-sona landed a crushing blow right in his arrogant face. The mentor immediately reminded in a cold voice that such worms must pay with their own lives for disrespecting the young master. With a single powerful strike, the boss was knocked out, and missing a couple of teeth, lay sprawled against the dirty wall. The formidable lady had warned that one day everyone would realize who the young master truly was, but by then, it would be too late for regret. Just one look at her face sent the unharmed into near-fainting fits of paralyzing fear, and they ended up fleeing with terrified screams like frightened rats. The alchemist asked the mentor to catch up with the runaway boys, find their thieves' hideout, recover all the stolen goods, and return the money to the innocent victims. In this tense moment, the confused young man couldn't understand what was happening or why this mysterious stranger chose to save him. Baek-jun calmly approached the young man, asked how he was feeling, and then explained that when the warrior was a child, he owed the boy's father a debt for saving him, and now the swordsman wanted to repay that old debt to the family, which is how everything came about. Of course, the hero was curious about where the boy's father had gone, but the boy had no idea and didn't really want to know the truth. Without digging further into family quarrels, Baek-jun advised the young man to disappear immediately before the other gangsters showed up for revenge. The warrior has already sent people to handle these issues. There should be no more trouble for the debtor from them, but there might still be other enemies involved. Clearly grateful, the guy immediately started frantically looking for a way to repay Baek-jun for the invaluable help he had given him. Then the young man handed the hero a small worn pendant, a gift from his father when he was just a baby, believing it would be better for the precious keepsake to stay with the young lord rather than with himself. The alchemist gratefully accepted the heartfelt gift, unaware that he had actually reached his true goal. Once the travelers were safely inside the walls of the Holy Sword clan, the mentor reported that she had dealt with the loan sharks as the hero had ordered. They turned out to be pretty nasty characters who caused a lot of trouble for honest folks, and since none of them were skilled hunters, Han-sona didn't even get a chance to properly test the magical skills he learned from Baek-jun. Besides, all these cowards were so terrified they were shaking with pure fear, which left the warrior feeling a bit disappointed. The player promised that she would soon have a great chance to test her growing powers, and that there was no need to get upset over small things. Only then did Han-sona notice the medallion on the gentleman's chest, something she had never seen before. The swordsman had been fiddling with it for a while, and the mentor was curious about what made it special. But Baek-jun only smiled mysteriously as he looked at the trinket hanging around his neck. It was no ordinary pendant, it held powerful magic within. When the warrior handed the artifact to Jin So-yeon, the sorceress immediately said the amulet contained a strong level of sealing magic. The heiress was clearly annoyed that after Yu Baek-jun had treated her so rudely on the snowy mountain, he showed up again asking for her help. The sorceress demanded that next time he needed help, he come to the magic tower in person, and the hero had no choice but to solemnly promise that this would be the last time. In the end, Jin So-yeon kindly agreed to help and asked for a few minutes to break the ancient seal. The sorceress focused her boundless magic on the medallion, and everything around was bathed in a dazzling golden light. Finally, the seal of the medallion fell, and Han Sona was the first to see what appeared on the table. It was a legendary artifact, the Observer's Eye, a mystical monocle that let you spy on people and uncover their deepest secrets. Yu Baek-jun was clearly thrilled to have secured this priceless artifact. As you know, besides the usual items, heroes also have artifacts with supernatural powers, which, once used, cannot be taken back or destroyed. They are incredibly hard to find, only available in rare dungeons, ancient ruins, or special events. And these magical artifacts mainly come in 3 types based on their use. First, there are conditional artifacts that can only be used if certain requirements are met, and these are quite rare. The other type is one-time use artifacts that lose their power or disappear completely after being used. And finally, the third type is artifacts that belong to a single owner and are always available. The Observer's Eye was exactly that kind of artifact. He recognized his user upon activation, and now his mystical power has merged into one of the hero's eyes, becoming a permanent ability. First, Yu Baek-jun decided to check if the priceless artifact was securely attached. The swordsman immediately looked intently at Lady Jin So-yeon before him and saw that her strength, agility, and endurance were all at level C, with mana at A+ class. However, after what he saw, the hero could barely hide his shock. He had never seen the real stats of Jin So-yeon at this stage of the game before. He could only guess how strong she really was. But her traits turned out to be even crazier than he had expected. If she's this powerful from the start, she'll soon become a real monster. And if the alchemist fails to stop the magical tower from collapsing, the final ending will lead to a face-to-face encounter with the crazed Jin So-yeon. No matter what, Yu Baek-jun had to stop the magical tower from falling at all costs. But to do that, he needed a lot more power. Fortunately, the story is unfolding just like in the game. But some events, like the senior mentor's attack with the magic orb, have changed. New information has come to light. In the past, Jin So-yeon was the former fiancé of Yu Baek-jun. To prepare for other unknown challenges, the warrior needed to become much stronger. His progress was good, but speeding up would be even better. To do this, the swordsman must go to that very place, find the traces of his ancestors, and unlock the achievement system. But now was exactly the moment in the game's story when his father was supposed to call him over. And indeed, the maid who entered the room respectfully announced that the head of the family was calling the young master. Happy that everything was unfolding just as expected, Yu Baek-jun headed off to the meeting. Besides the hero, the meeting also included mentors and other children of the patriarch. First, the leader turned to Yu Kong-ho and asked if his wounds had healed after treatment by Ju Jun-won. Despite the treatment, the son stayed locked up in his room, so the father was curious. Had his skills improved since the last failure? He just awkwardly tilted his head, never giving a clear answer. Yu Baek-jun could barely hold back his laughter. True strength lies in acknowledging one's weaknesses, something Yu Kong-ho prefers to ignore, as he now just locks himself in his room, avoiding the harsh reality. The head of the family understood perfectly well. Yu Kong-ho had let him down and was worse than trash, so the patriarch gave him one last chance to make things right. Then he turned to his trusted instructor. Ja-en immediately pressed the remote, and a detailed map with 4 marked locations appeared behind the children's backs. There were 4 gates on the sacred mountain, each differing in difficulty and location. The most dangerous were the gates marked number 4. It wasn't surprising, since the time and place where the portals appeared matched exactly what happened in the game. The gates leading to other worlds in the Game of Heroes were divided into 2 main types. The first are the bursting gates that have been spewing monsters since the beginning. The second type are penetrating challenges that you must enter yourself and survive a deadly trial. If you ignore the penetrating gates for too long, they will start releasing monsters just like the spilling ones. Also, if the gates aren't cleared within the set time, they will reach the release stage. At this stage, the gates and the monsters within them become much more powerful. As you know, the 4th gates were the toughest, not just because of their size, but also due to their very unfavorable location. They appeared in the dungeon, their release date is approaching, and a major disaster is expected. Yumin realized that during the dungeon raid, they needed to close those tricky gates on time. The older sister knew that to win their father's favor, she had to go and clear out the overflowing gates. But the risk was too great, and if any of the children died, she would be held responsible. And then, out of nowhere, Yu Baekjun firmly declared he was heading to the fourth gate. The father clearly reminded his heir that those gates were the toughest, and it would be reckless to rush in there. However, Yu Baekjun made it clear that he had a specific plan in mind. Instead of cowardly turning away from a tough situation, he needs to face it head-on. If the swordsman becomes the head of the Holy Sword clan, he will constantly face similar situations in the future. The father was quite pleased with such a mature response. In the end, the patriarch trusted Yu Baekjun and gave him the responsibility to clear gate number 4. Without wasting a second, the player immediately decided to set off on a dangerous journey, because this was exactly the time he needed to start looking for the traces left by the great ancestors. Before heading to these gates, it was important to prepare a few essential items, especially some needed for protection in the high mountains. Also, there's the Berserker trait, gained by those obsessed with mountain passes. It boosts physical abilities and speed for a limited time, but of course it comes with dangerous side effects. The alchemist also prepared 2 promising apprentices, those with the highest potential for growth who were not under the harmful influence of their older brother. These talented students were guided by the wise mentor Ja-en and were set to become A-rank hunters the moment their training ended. Since they were still inexperienced trainees, it was clear they faced a tough challenge in this deadly trial, especially as the young warriors were very sensitive to the freezing cold of the mountain peaks. In any case, the expedition had to hurry. If they didn't pick up the pace, the trainees would simply freeze to death in these harsh conditions. Soon, Han Sona, leading the squad, realized they had reached their fateful destination. It was a massive chasm in the ground, with an ancient staircase winding down into dark depths. This is where the heroes descended in the game. Yu Baekjun knew very well that the dungeon was much larger and deeper inside than it appeared from the outside. Even the interns noticed that they've been going down for what feels like forever. But as the group ventured deeper, they came upon a place that literally took their breath away. But Han Sona found it extremely strange that such an eerie place was wrapped in complete silence. The swordsman calmly explained that the family had found this place using a gate detector. No one had ever been down here before. But if you look closely at the walls, you can see marks that look like dried bloodstains, suggesting a fierce battle took place here between the dungeon monsters and the creatures that came through the gates. However, the warrior saw no bodies or corpses, so he decided to ask the trainees what might be going on. The insightful Han Son was the first to guess that the cause might lie with the poisonous mantises. After thanking his mentor for the quick reply, the young man decided to ask the trainee what he knew about these dangerous creatures. And indeed, the mentor told them about these monsters. The venomous mantis is the top predator among all monsters. Once it spots its prey, it devours it completely. This creature looks like a mantis but has a poisonous tail, along with sharp hearing and a keen sense of smell. He has many deadly traits, but the most dangerous one is his tendency to live in groups. If someone spots a single praying mantis, there are usually several more nearby, which is why even top-level hunters steer clear of these creatures. The mentor advised to run without looking back if they ever encounter those creatures. Now the trainees realized these poisonous mantises were even more dangerous than the teacher had said. In this tense moment, the hero broke their fearful thoughts by asking someone to hand him the rope. Then, with a mysterious smile, he decided to reveal to them the strategy for fighting these monsters. While the squad was talking, a venomous mantis hid among the dark, winding cliffs. Over time, this species' eyesight has worsened, so praying mantises rely on their sense of smell to tell prey apart from their own kind. So the warriors covered themselves in the monster's bodily fluids to launch a sudden, lightning-fast attack. The intern chopped off both of the praying mantis's claws, because these creatures use them as their main weapon. Then they cut off his poisonous tail. Left weaponless, the monster let out a piercing scream to call its comrades. At that moment, Yu Baekjun arrived and struck the monster right in the head. Among them was Han Sona, who possessed the greatest magical power. She activated the precious scroll of silence to completely mute all sounds. The team repeated this flawless process to catch a total of 10 venomous mantises. The moment they finished, there were about 5 minutes left before the silence scroll wore off. Clearly, Han Sona was worried. Would everything really happen just as Yu Baekjun predicted? Because if not, they'd all be in serious trouble. However, the alchemist knew that even if things went wrong, he had a backup plan. He also brought extra fuel containers, so there was no need to panic. Han Sona, holding this vessel, was amazed at how the young master was always prepared for any surprise, which is why he values his pocket dimensions so much. This guy had incredible talent, impressive skills, and vast knowledge. Even the experienced Han Sona had something to learn from him. At this crucial moment, the silence scroll's effect began to fade and disappear. So the hero immediately told all the interns and the mentor to cover their ears. In the next moment, the warrior activated the sound-boosting scroll, waiting for the mantises to roar at full volume. Finally, a deafening roar echoed through the cave, followed immediately by the thunderous sound of massive paws. Soon, swarms of praying mantises appeared before the squad, crawling all over the walls and ground. The intern was stunned. There were so many monsters, they were practically sitting on each other's heads. The girl couldn't believe that the young gentleman was about to take down so many monsters with his bold plan. But as ordered, all of the warriors threw away their vials, and from that moment, the plan to destroy the mantises began. With the addition of a special oil they made themselves, the largest number of monsters gathered in one place. So, once the oil was spilled on the ground, the hero readied his fiery weapon. A massive explosion wiped out a huge horde of beasts, as the flames spread from one monster to the next. Watching the monsters burn in the hellish flames, the hero felt an unprecedented sense of satisfaction. Finally, all the creatures were destroyed. But as the squad ventured deeper into the lair, they came face to face with a giant praying mantis. This praying mantis was their queen, and luckily she was completely obsessed with guarding her eggs. This meant it was the perfect moment for a surprise attack. For this reason, the alchemist asked the mentor to use her unique ability. She just hesitated awkwardly because she still wasn't skilled enough with the technique. Besides, after using it, she will be incapacitated for a while. However, the hero asked them not to worry. This would be their last opponent for today. So, trusting the young gentleman, the woman quickly focused and released her mana. This was the legendary Phantom Sword technique. It allows you to create and wield phantom blades, and can attack with anywhere from 1 to 10 swords at the same time. However, the consumption of magical energy is enormous, so the usage time is extremely limited. After using this ability, you feel an intense wave of exhaustion. But the time Hansona takes to use this technique is comparable to that of an S-class hunter. So she rushed at the monster, eager to deal with it as quickly as possible. In the end, the mentor struck the monster with dozens, even hundreds of lightning-fast attacks. Even the trainees found it hard to believe that such a massive queen could be reduced to bloody scraps in an instant. It was their first time witnessing their teacher's devastating power. Finally, the dungeon was completely cleared, and the hero saw the sacred grail, guarded closely by the queen herself. At that moment, the mentor's technique slowly began to fade away. She was a bit tired, but otherwise felt perfectly fine. So, Yubek Jun suggested everyone take a short break. He then approached the grail before him and dropped a single drop of his blood into it. Immediately, the bowl began to glow with a bright golden light. Of course, the interns immediately got scared, thinking the young gentleman was in danger. But the guy calmly asked not to worry. He was about to take the sacred test. Then the warrior promised the kids he would return soon and asked them to wait for him here. Right after that, a golden light pulled him into an unknown realm. So the alchemist found himself in the testing grounds of the god of war, where completing the challenge could earn him a full 500 experience points. But ahead of him, the hero saw many human figures. They all spoke in unison, saying they had served the great god of war, and must put Yubek Jun to the test to see if he was worthy of becoming the successor. As soon as the warrior agreed, all these shadows launched a fierce attack. Their true nature was that of shadow warriors, persistent creatures that keep coming back no matter how many times they die. Perhaps the god of war designed this trial to see how his successor handles fighting overwhelming numbers of enemies. Obviously, only beginners would mindlessly kill that many enemies. Since shadow warriors are actually clones, there's a different way to handle this. He just needed to catch one true warrior, and then the test will be complete. Given the reward he was set to receive for the upcoming trials, the swordsman couldn't afford to miss this opportunity. So he used his berserker skill to deal with them much faster. As you know, since clones are just illusions, killing them doesn't help you gain energy. However, shadow warriors were different from regular clones. Instead of being formless as their name suggests, they had a distinct physical form. The fact that they have a physical form means they can be affected by debuffs. This also means you can build up enough energy during battle to activate the berserker mode. After defeating countless shadows, the alchemist reached a berserker state, fully charged with energy. This is basically a cheat boost that raises all stats by a whole level. The truth is, it only lasts 5 minutes, but that should be enough to put an end to the ordeal. Thanks to the boost he received, the hero could move much faster. Having found the right clone, the warrior focused his aim directly on him. As soon as the head was severed, the remaining shadow warriors immediately started to crumble into tiny fragments. The hero decided to focus on the legacy of the great ancestors while the berserker's energy still lingered.